welcome back to the Daily Update from the Wayne County Sheriff's Office. I'm Captain Doug Hunter, coming to you today on June the 7th, 2018. As you may recall, I promised to videotape a public information meeting which took place at the Wayne County Admin Building on Tuesday evening. This on the topic of a proposed expansion of the Wayne County Jail. Now, I'm going to warn you right now that this video covers the meeting from start to finish, about 2 hours long, and in my opinion, very few people are going to watch 2 hours of video, but nonetheless I will post it so that you have the option to watch it all or skip through it, pick out the high points as you will. But I want to kind of give you a quick synopsis of what this video is about, the need for expanded Wayne County Jail. The current jail is full all the time, to the point to where we are constantly boarding prisoners out of county, and the layout of the jail is antiquated, meaning that when the jail was built, the majority of our prisoners were the simple disorderly conduct and driving under suspension, DUI types of cases with an occasional felon thrown in. Today, the makeup of our jail is much different, many serious offenders that are in there. And again, the space is not adequate. We have over 120 individuals in jail each and every day, and of course the jail was built to hold 80. So that's a little bit about the capacity. I saw a comment somebody made recently on this project asking the question of why would they even dream of building or expanding the jail when they already turn the prisoners loose as soon as they're captured. Well, they actually answered that question within their own question. The reason that there is this quick turnover is the lack of jail space. Oftentimes when we go out and we arrest individuals on arrest warrants, they will laugh and make the comment that they will be out of jail before we complete the paperwork, and in many times, the majority of times, that is exactly the case. Because again, if the jail is full, it makes a difficult decision on who to keep in jail and who to turn loose, and our officers who are in charge of the jail are constantly asking the judges who can they release perhaps early, of course with the judge's consent, and the judges don't like to be placed in that situation. They dole out sentences in hopes of correcting misbehavior, and if there's no space for these people, you can see the problem that it presents. Long and short of the jail expansion, to build the expansion as well as to renovate the existing building, it's going to cost in the neighborhood of $40 million. That's a lot of cash, and the Wayne County Commissioners are going to try to figure out the way for that to be funded. And I just about said for the way for you to fund that, and long and short of it, that's the case it will be. I'm sure this will be put to a vote at a later date, and you will make the decision on whether this expansion takes place or not. One of the things I want you to think about is the people that should be in jail, oftentimes they're not, and they're the people that are out committing crimes in your neighborhood. So that is just something to consider, as well as a number of people who are currently on probation. There are hundreds of people on probation for both felony and misdemeanor crimes, and I'm certainly not saying that some of those folks do not deserve probation, but oftentimes probation comes their way because of a lack of any other incarceration options. So I want you to take a look at the video. Again, 2 hours long. I apologize for that. One of the fellows that were the speaker, I asked him ahead of time how long this meeting was going to take, and he said, oh, about 30 minutes. Well, 2 hours into it, it finally did wrap up. So it makes a very long video. I did not do any type of fancy editing or anything like that for this. What you see is exactly what took place that night. So again, take a look at it, and I'll remind you, as I always do, to think a little more of others and a little less of yourself, and things will be a whole lot better right here in Wayne County, Ohio.
Welcome you for being here tonight, and thank you for coming. When the City Police Department moved out of the Justice Center in June of 2017, we were presented with an opportunity to look at our facility and more or less assess what we wanted to do with that facility. So we we interviewed and hired our architect, Greg Strollo from Strollo & Associates, and we have been working with consultant Tom Weber from the National Institute of Corrections. And Jim Strollo, I only know him as J-Pat. So they're here, and they performed a thorough review of our current facility as well as what our future needs might be. And we're now at a point where we have been given some recommendations, and tonight you'll be provided with those recommendations and the facts, as well as some other answers to questions that you might have. We'll be going over those at the end of the period. We're going to have some introductions. The Sheriff's Department is going to speak, the judges are going to speak, and then we will move on with the presentation by Strollo. The purpose of this meeting is to provide the public with information regarding the deficiencies that have been identified in our current jail and the subsequent process that was initiated to thoroughly examine these deficiencies. With that, Ann Obrecht is going to introduce those elected officials who are present.
Well, we're real excited to have a lot of elected officials here, and I'm going to start with our county elected officials. Our sheriff is here, Sheriff Travis Hutchinson. Our judges from Common Pleas Court, we have Judge Mark Wiest and Judge Corey Spittler, somewhere there. And we have our municipal court judges, Judge Tim Van Sickle and Judge Rickett. Also from the city of Worcester, we have Mayor Bob Brenneman there. And we have council people, Craig Sanders, Bill Postancic, Scott Myers, and I thought there was one more. Am I missing somebody from council? I guess not. Okay, 3 from council. And our health commissioner is also here tonight, Nick Casarelli. So welcome to the elected officials that are here, and many of them are going to be our judges, and everyone has a big stake in this. And I do want to thank our elected officials, county elected officials, that have been working with us on this study. So at this point, Sheriff Travis Hutchinson. We'll talk a little bit about, how we got to this point.
Hello everyone, thanks for coming out today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the Justice Center, since I'm the only person affiliated with the Sheriff's Office that has been there since the building opened. So I was 19 when I started in the office as a reserve deputy. I was, like I said, 19 years old, and that would have been December of 1977, and then immediately January of 1978 I went right in the academy. So was that 41 years ago, I think it was. So I've seen a lot of changes within the building itself, and the operations and the structure of it has pretty much stayed the same as far as the outside looks. There a lot of internal changes though. When we opened up in 1977, there were 78 beds, and the 4th floor had not been completed yet, so that left room for expansion. And there was days that we didn't have the entire jail filled. I can remember times that the maximum security blocks were not even occupied at that point. And as we moved forward and it got into the 1980s, then we were filled up pretty rapidly. So it just shows you, less than a 10-year period, we were already packing those over the capacity we had. In the 80s, we were sued for overcrowding, and under a federal consent decree for 10 years, every month we were inspected. They would come in and check for compliance. 1980, we'll forward up there another 10 years there. We opened 24 beds on the 4th floor at that point and increased our capacity to 102. Later in the 1990s, the federal consent decree was completed. And 1999, we started working on that discipline rehabilitation center. And it was initially able to hold 40 inmates. That was down at the old IGA store, and we had for low-level offenders, DUI, driving under suspensions. We had quite a few of those, which now it's kind of flip-flopped on us with the type of inmates we had. We opened it up, like I said, in 1999, and 2009, the Discipline Rehabilitation Center finally did close the doors for, I think it was mostly for funding reasons. 2000, when we were wanting to do some expansion on the jail, because at that point there, we were seeing that we needed more room at the current facility we had. And we were trying to get some funding when they were building the new municipal court building that's attached to us with a walkway, little skyway walkway there for the transportation of inmates from the jail over to the municipal court. But we were unable to get the funding to complete an expansion project at that point. In 2009, we added 18 more beds in the jail by double bunking the 3A and 1B cell blocks. And the 1B cell block was historically for the females, which we only had at that point, I think it was 12, six, but I mean we're up to 12 after we double bunked them. So the original design of the building was for 6 females, and by double bunking we got 12 in that cell block. General population numbers now are currently 120. 2009, we received permission from the Bureau of Adult Detention to house prisoners in the gymnasium on a temporary basis and as needed. So we can't put them in there for long term, but we can put them in there for temporary housing as we need the space.
4 of those, excuse me, for single cell use. So that drops your bed count to around 232 out of this, in this concept. Now, we also think you can add beds back into it by doing a couple things. One is creating a lot of those dormitory spaces for the population that it fits, so you, without question, have a minimum population of males that could do well in a 64-bed dormitory style setting. You also have a small population of females that would also do well in a dormitory. Those kinds of a design option for minimum beds do not require the same types of overall square footage to accommodate the bed. So you can actually get more beds back that you lost by going down to the single bed count, okay? In any scenario that we have in these concepts, it has complete flexibility, and it will allow for those bed design numbers to be known during what we call the creation of these construction documents and the design documents, okay? Because that's when the staff from the sheriff's office and the jail will be working with us to look at how they want to function and monitor and manage the jail operation in terms of housing assignments. In all of these scenarios, I can see that you're going to need between a range now of 45.5 and 56.5 correctional officers and sergeants. Okay, right now you have about 32, so it is an increase of at least 13 and a half positions, that's people, or perhaps up to 56.5. Now what's going to determine that? You saw on concept, I think, number 2, when Greg talked about the ability to maybe move that one central control into one area. There's basically staff required for 2 different functions in a jail. One is to manage control. So that's doing all the monitoring of the closed circuit TV and doing door control, access, perimeter control, all of those things from a control area. That person never leaves that control area. Then there's what we call rover or movement officers. Those officers move around and they actually get into the jail cells. They do your 15-minute checks, your 30-minute checks, your rounds, if you will, whatever is dictated and determined by policy, because obviously if you have somebody on suicide watch, that officer is in there looking at them a lot more frequently than they are in the minimum supervision bed. Again, it goes back to the importance of classifications. But what we don't know is how we're going to handle the mental health and the medical population yet. We have schemed a few ideas about having what we would call an outpatient clinic, if you will, which may go into the existing building, could conceivably go in there, or we have to accommodate medical services in the new facility. So that 180 by 100 foot footprint may flex according to where those medical and mental health services are going to be located, and then where they're going to be housed. So if you are going to create a mental health unit, you're going to probably be adding one permanent staff post. Each permanent staff post is the equivalent of 5.5 people. A 24/7 post equals 5.5 people to manage that in a 24/7 operation. So that's why we have this range. It could slightly go down depending on design, and it could possibly go up. My initial impression is you're going to wind up with about 51 staff, which is going to raise from where you're at 32, but it's not the 70s that we talked about when we were going to be running two different jails. So the operational costs are driven by the staffing costs. We have a range of costs that we have calculated. We didn't refine that yet, but we know that on the low end, it's going to be somewhere around $2.7 million for staffing. Could go as high as about $3.8 million. If it's at the 56.5 and you have higher, longer senior staff and things like that. Currently, the budget for the jail is about $3.2 million. Is that right? 3.2 million. So we're not talking about a huge impact on the current budget if we're at the low end. Of course, they have lots of other operational needs come into this. The nice thing about a new facility is your operational costs for maintenance are way down for a few years. So you don't have to be fixing and maintaining and replacing clothing, mattresses, equipment, furniture, fixture equipment, because it's new going into a new building. So at the early opening of a facility, your operational costs and your maintenance costs are much less. Here's some of the recommendations.
I'll give this a shot. And late in our schematic design iterations, Tom mentioned that there could be an increase in the footprint. I should have emphasized when we were on some of those schematics that there is a mezzanine level above the control booths that is currently unoccupied, and we would do the medical and mental inside the footprint above the control areas in the mezzanine space above that. So it probably would not increase the footprint of the building, would increase some of the finished square footage. So I am the messenger and I expect to get shot, but we're recommending that a target of about 240 beds, which will change with the classification and the use of whether those are single or double bunks. That could go a little higher, could go a little lower. 240 beds is the target for all the inmate types. This equates to about a 90,000 square foot facility. Using a modest construction cost, about the mid-range of what's being built. There's the cost ranges for new construction in jails is running anywhere from $300 to $450 a square foot. We took the midpoint, and that generates about $33,750,000 for new construction of the jail piece. We're recommending a budgeting process for about $9 million to renovate the existing building. That's about 53,000 square feet of renovation. Some of that is in court space.
Form. I'm going to let Captain Richards come up here, and he can talk to you more about what our daily population is now and the current conditions and what we're paying for outside housing when we have to turn them out. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Captain Richards, just a little bit about myself. I've been with the Sheriff's Office for 26 years, and my career has been in corrections, so I've seen it go through a lot of changes throughout the years. But I have to put my glasses down here so I can actually see what I'm talking about. Well, first I want to talk about the classification needs of a jail. There's 3 classifications that jails can hold: minimum, medium, and maximum security. Now we have 2 minimum cell blocks for males, 1 medium cell block for males, and 2 maximum security cell blocks for males. And for females, we have 1 cell block. As the sheriff mentioned before, they were in our small cell block before and our 1B cell block. But now we've had a population increase from 6 to now we average between 30 and 35 females. So we had to use one of our other cell blocks to house our females now, which is, you know, one of our other ones is 24 beds. So we have 24 beds in the jail to house females, but of course that reduces our male population. So now we only have one medium cell block to house prisoners. So we, you know, we're governed by the state on how we classify people into the jail, violent from nonviolent, and try to keep in their proper classification, which we struggle with daily, trying to keep inmates in their proper classification. For instance, we have one medium cell block, and what that would entail would be possibly a violent misdemeanor like a domestic violence charge, an assault charge, or a nonviolent felony, which would be you know, a drug user or something to that nature. Felony theft, something like that would be a nonviolent felony. And only having one cell block of 24 beds for this population becomes cumbersome because, let's say, two guys don't get along. Now, what am I going to do with this other guy? Now I have to mix classifications, put him someplace else because these guys are fighting. So we struggle with that daily. Another thing that we struggle with is our female population. Again, you know, all three classifications are now in one cell block. So what are we doing with that? You know, I talked with the Bureau of Adult Detention on ways to, you know, compromise and be able to meet this standard with the state. Excuse me, with the state. And one of the suggestions is, you know, one of the things that we've done is we separate the violent from the non-violent by locking half the cell block down while the other half is out. So half the day someone will be locked down, and the other half of the day they'll be out. So that's one of the things that we're doing, but one of the things that we struggle with daily. Another things we struggle with is special needs. I'm going to go through a little bit of statistical information here just to let you know where we're at. In 2017, with my mental health in the jail and their interviews with the inmates that come in, 78% of the inmates had some sort of addiction issue, whether it be, you know, alcohol or drugs or what have you. 68% had a mental illness. You know, not a serious mental illness, but been diagnosed at one point in time with some sort of mental illness. And 48% had both an addiction and but diagnosed with a mental illness. 4% was a seriously mentally ill. That 4%, somebody that, you know, may have been in a hospital or something to that nature. Just give you a quick idea, and to handle this population, which is well above 50% of our population, I have seven housing beds for those to handle mental illness and addiction, someone going through withdrawal or something like that, which is very cumbersome, and that's a daily battle, and that my jail staff have to, you know, work with daily. And same thing with medical. I mean, my medical population has to tie up those same beds. So I got 7 beds to work with mental health as well as our medical. So that becomes very cumbersome. Now, the jail was designed for, well, the state says we can hold 80 prisoners. Currently our population, general population is 120 beds. So, and we have 2 isolation cells. So the higher your population gets, the more problems you're going to have with your inmate population because of the stress levels, so many people being packed into a cell. You have a small area with, for instance, one of my cell blocks has 28 prisoners, and the state says I'm only supposed to have 14 in there. So this all combined raises stress levels, and they, you know, we've had more incidents in the past year. For instance, in 2015, our incident levels were, excuse me, we had right around 800 incident reports, between 800 and 900 incident reports. This year alone, we're going to be well above 1,000 reports, just through incidents throughout the jail. What kind of incidents I'm talking about? Inmate on inmate violence. I'm talking about, you know, destruction of jail property, things of that nature. So you see a big increase when you see a population increase, and it becomes harder to manage the inmate. actually the inmate becomes the manager because they're managing your time, and it's less time that you have to do the other duties that you're required to do. I'll give you a short history on the population. In 2015, we had an average daily population for the year of 109 inmates. 2016, it went to 117. 2017 was at 130, and this year so far we're at 136. So as you can see, the number is going up, and it's from what the sheriff was saying earlier. It's always been a constant battle, trying to stay ahead of the game and trying to get beds for these prisoners. Today, we had 20 inmates out of county. We're housing them in Ashland County, Stark County, Huron County, Morrow County, and Richland County. So we're housing them wherever we can find space to house them. And that's getting harder as well, for instance, because other counties are having the same issues as we're having, increased population. What's driving that? Well, the opiates issue that we were having last year, that's down a little bit, but we're seeing a lot of the results coming from that. State legislation is changing.
Which takes that number up a little bit. That could be managed a little differently, depends on levels of finishes that are required by the county and how much is spent on technology in the conferencing and training space. We think that's a very rational ceiling to use for budgeting for this sort of project. And I think that's, again, I wish there was a better way. Nobody likes to build jails. These are expensive propositions, but in this case, it's all about risk management. And I cannot impress upon you enough what a miracle it is that you're in the situation you are now without more problems. You have what it amounts to is a really horrible jail right now. It's nobody's fault. It's natural. You're in the same situation that most counties are that had jails built in this same time period. Not that it's a twin, but there's a county up north in the exact same situation with the exact same jail design within a few feet, few little modest design tweaks, but for all intents and purposes, you have a twin brother in Ashtabula. They're experiencing the exact same problems in terms of not being able to meet codes, not having sight lines, not being able to conform to all of the current regulations that are necessary for the safe operation of a jail. So, I do have one question, if there are any others, or would you rather?
Let me just take a minute or two before we go to questions. And by the way, if you have written down a question, can you pass them off, pick them up from you so we can process those? I just wanted to explain something. And by the way, patience, you've been here an hour and a half. Thank you for that. We are in today hearing basically for the first time the product of what happened in this first phase. It's a recommendation from our specialist. We're now going to spend June getting a deeper understanding of this and the public is having to understand what's being recommended. And then probably July.
I guess I have to talk about this from both sides.
A big part of that is when I see these numbers. Part of the project that start to deeper in understanding what it means. how does that fit the county operations? But something of this scale is not something that you can say, well, trim the budget here and there, and we are just going to
Hello, Sharon. Good. Great to see you. You doing okay?
that will come later on.
I'm good, how are you? Have we met face to face?
Probably looking
Okay, one time. Okay. Because I keep seeing it, these things like your head and I don't think I've got to introduce myself, I probably was at something. Okay. Okay, okay. We're good now.
Looking at some other locations that considered outside of downtown. Backtrack just a bit. Late in the discussion. It hasn't been discounted. It hasn't been done. We've not done a deep dive into that. Largely security reasons. It made the most sense to our team to place the jail where we recommended. Doesn't mean we can give you a cost analysis. Somewhere outside the city of Worcester. However, without a site specific, you can't really do that analysis. Well, running the utilities typically can be expensive, especially when you're talking about a large piece of property that's outside the service area. That doesn't mean that it can't be an option. I will tell you that for the transfer of prisoners, it would be a nightmare. You'd have two courts, the jail adjacent to neither. You'd have a building which would be, in this case, we're repurposing much of it to support the construction of the jail. Now you have the existing building, then construct a new jail inside of
You're good?
Yeah, we're good. It's mostly for the transfer of prisoners and the security of the inmates and the staff that the building is placed in that parking lot. Security is the foremost and everything. This is all about risk management. I want to say hindsight in criminal justice throughout the country is you're at the greatest risk during prison transfer. I can tell you that in the county that I'm from, the last two police officers that have been killed have been during prison transfer. People find out, they think you've got secrets in your jail, somebody fakes a medical problem there at the Worcester Hospital. Next thing you know, their buddy knows when they're being transferred, one car pulls up.
We're starting to fill in here. They said it was just like church, nobody wanted to sit in the front pews. So on behalf of the county commissioners, we want to welcome you for being here tonight and thank you for coming. When the city police department moved out of the Justice Center in June of 2017, we were presented with an opportunity to look at our facility and more or less assess what we wanted to do with that facility.
That's a little bit of the
So we
issues that we're seeing in the
interviewed and hired our
But,
architect, Greg
you know,
Strollo
let's
from
talk
Strollo
about the
Associates,
building
and we have been working with
for
consultant
instance,
Tom Weber
You know, you look at the building,
from the National Institute of Corrections.
Take a tour of the facility.
And
I got a handful of staff.
Jim Strollo, I only know him as J. Pat.
They keep the door shining,
So
they keep the
they're here,
brass door
and
knobs shining,
they performed a thorough review of our current facility, as well as what our future needs might be. And we're now at a point where we have been given some recommendations, and tonight you'll be provided with those recommendations and the facts, as well as some other answers to questions that you might have. We'll be going over those at the end of the period. We're going to have some introductions. The Sheriff's Department is going to speak, the judges are going to speak, and then we will move on with the presentation of Vice Rolo. The purpose of this meeting is to provide the public with information regarding the deficiencies that have been identified in our current jail and the subsequent process that was initiated to thoroughly examine these deficiencies. With that, Ann Obrecht is going to introduce those elected officials who are present.
Well, we're real excited to have a lot of elected officials here, and I'm going to start with our county elected officials. Our sheriff is here, Sheriff Travis Hutchinson. Our judges from Common Pleas Court, we have Judge Mark Weiss,
gives you an idea of
Judge Corey Spittler,
some of the issues
somewhere there, and we have our municipal court judges, Judge Tim Van Sickle and Judge Rickett. Also from
jail designs.
the city of Worcester, we have Mayor Bob Brenneman
We have what we
there,
consider a cell block.
and we have council people
Jail
Craig
designs
Sanders,
that are popular in
Bill
design, where,
Bostancic,
you know, I can stand
Scott
for
Myers,
see every
and I
aspect
thought there was one
of
more.
what the inmates are doing in the
Have you
pod.
seen somebody from council?
Whereas,
I guess
and
not.
we call them
Okay, brief
sightlines.
council.
as well, you know,
And
where
our
jail
health
prisoners
commissioner is
are
also here tonight,
understand where the officer
Nick
station is
Casarelli.
at,
So,
and I cannot see
welcome to the elected
anything
officials that are here, and many of them are going to be our judges, and everyone has a big stake in this. And I do want to thank our elected officials, county elected officials, that have been working with us on this study.
2 or 3 different cell
So
blocks
at this
depending on
point,
what level at the jail. So there's just a
Sheriff
couple of
Travis
design issues.
We'll talk a little bit about, how we got to this point.
One of the problems we're having is drugs.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming out today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the Justice Center, since I'm the only person affiliated with the Sheriff's Office has been there since the building opened. So I was 19 when I started in the office as a reserve deputy. I was, like I said, 19 years old, and that would have been December of 1977, and then immediately January 1978 I went right in the academy. So was that 41 years ago, I think it was. So I've seen a lot of changes within the building itself, and the operations and the structure of it has pretty much stayed the same as far as the outside looks. There a lot of internal changes though. When we opened up in 1977, there were 78 beds, and the 4th floor had not been completed yet, so that left room for expansion. And there was days that we didn't have the entire jail filled. I can remember times that the maximum security blocks were not even occupied at that point. And as we moved forward and got into the 1980s, then we were filled up pretty rapidly. So it just shows you, less than a 10-year period, we were already packing those over the capacity we had. In the 80s, we were sued for overcrowding, and under a federal consent decree for 10 years, every month we were inspected. They would come in and check for compliance. 1980, we'll forward up there another 10 years there. We opened 24 beds on the 4th floor at that point and increased our capacity to 102. Later in the 1990s, the federal consent decree was completed. And 1999, we started working on that discipline rehabilitation center, and it was initially able to hold 40 inmates. And that was down at the OIGA store, and we had low-level offenders, DUI, driving under suspensions. We had quite a few of those, which now it's kind of flip-flopped on us with the type of inmates we had. We opened it up, like I said, in 1999, and 2009, the Discipline Rehabilitation Center finally did close the doors for, I think, mostly for funding reasons. 2000, when we were wanting to do some expansion on the jail, because at that point there, we were seeing that we needed more room at the current facility we had, and we were trying to get some funding when they were building the new municipal court building that's attached to us, with a walkway, little skyway walkway there for the transportation of inmates from the jail over to the municipal court. But we were unable to get the funding to complete an expansion project at that point. In 2009, we added 18 more beds in the jail, a double bunking
that
3A
adds up after a while.
and 1B cell
And many
blocks. And the
times
1B cell
we
block
can
was
determine who
historically for the
we
females,
want
which
as
we
practice windows. Well, we find
only
out,
had
we charge
at that
them,
point,
we
I think it was
expect them to,
12,
reimburse.
six, but I mean, we're up to 12 after we double bunked it. So the original design of the building was for 6 females.
And if they did,
And by double bunking, we got 12 in that cell block.
So-
General population numbers now
So
are
we have those issues going on as well.
currently 120. 2009,
One of the cell
we
blocks. the state
received
says
permission
that
from the Bureau of
we have
Adult
28
Detention
inmates in
to
there,
house
and
prisoners in the
there's
gymnasium
6 and 2
on a
toilets.
temporary basis
They
and
get
as
variance
needed.
from
So
the
we can't put them in there
and that,
for long term, but we
you know,
can
they're supposed to
put them in
be
there for temporary housing
one shower per
as we need the
one
space
sink,
for them.
space.
I'm going to let
So-
Captain
so,
Richards come up there. Now, he can
yeah,
talk to you more about
and-
what our daily population is now and the current conditions and what we're paying for outside housing when we have to turn them out. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Captain Richards, just a little bit about myself. I've been with the Sheriff's Office for 26 years, and my career has been in corrections, so I've seen it go through a lot of changes throughout the years. But I have to put my glasses down here so I can actually see what I'm talking about. Well, first I want to talk about the classification needs of a jail. There's 3 classifications that jails can hold: minimum, medium, and maximum security. Now, we have 2 minimum
So
cell
prisoner
blocks for
transfer means a lot
males,
plus
1 medium
Sheriff's
cell block for
Sheriff's
males,
Department
and 2
doesn't mean
maximum
you can't
security
build a
cell blocks for
freestanding jail
males.
someplace else.
And for females,
If
we
you
have
do,
1 cell block.
you'd probably end up doing all your
As the
course
sheriff
with-
mentioned before, they were in our small cell block before and our 1B cell block. But now,
That's what's most
we've had a
commonly done.
population increase from 6 to now we average between 30 and 35 females. So we had to use one of our other cell blocks to house our females now, which is, you know, one of our other ones is 24 beds.
Are there,
So we have 24 beds in the
guidelines
jail
regarding
to
staff
house
to
females,
ratio?
but of course that
There are not,
reduces our male
guidelines
population.
pertaining to that. Only do
So now we only have
state
1
standards
medium
regarding
cell block to
staff.
house prisoners. So we, you know, we're governed by the state on how we classify people into the jail, violent from non-violent, and try to keep in their proper classification,
Some of the things,
which we
however,
struggle
that
with
are
daily,
in place
trying
determine
to
what
keep
those staffing
inmates in their
ratios
proper
are.
classification.
As the
For
design
instance,
documents
we
get
have 1
developed,
medium
they consistently go to the
cell
state
block, and
board
what that
of
would
ethics
entail would
and
be
the local jail
possibly
inspector
a
go,
violent misdemeanor like a
and
domestic
he
violence
will
charge, an
analyze
assault charge,
how many
or
jail beds
a
can be
non-violent felony,
located
which
in
would be
each
a
area, and they
a
will
drug
approve
user
the
or something to that
staffing
nature.
patterns that we
Felony
would be
theft, something
proposing.
like that would be a
Now,
non-violent felony.
some states
Um,
do have minimum
And only having 1 cell
mandatory
block of
type
24
regulations.
beds for this
Ohio does not
population
have those.
becomes cumbersome
In
because,
other
let's
states,
say 2
yeah.
guys don't get along.
And
Now,
in
what am I
local
going to do with this other
jurisdictions,
guy?
sometimes,
Now I have to mix
if there
classification, put
is
him
a
someplace
local
else because
labor
these
union
guys are
that
fighting.
represents
So
the
we struggle with that
correctional
daily.
officers,
Um,
they will,
Another
as
thing that we
part of their
struggle
contract,
with is our
also
female
establish
population.
what those
Again,
ratios
you know,
are.
all 3 classifications
But
are now
in
1
this
cell block.
particular instance,
So
in
what are
our
we doing with that?
concepts,
You know,
we actually
I
moved
talked
to
with
a
the
ratio
Bureau
of
of
about
detention on ways to
one
you know,
staff
compromise and be
7
able
inmates,
to
give or take,
meet the standard with the state,
which
excuse me,
is
with the state.
better than what your
And
current staffing ratio
one of the
is.
suggestions is,
Again,
you know, one of the things that
remember
we've
that
done is
You're
we
currently
separate
understaffed. You
the
have
violent
much
from the
positions that
non-violent
are
by
unoccupied and should
locking
be
half the
staffed.
cell block down
Current ratio
while the
is
other
about
half is
1
out.
staff
So,
for
so half the
4.7
day someone
inmates,
will be
and
locked
that's
down and the other half of the
the
day
average daily
they'll be
population,
out.
not the
So
licensed
that's one of the
beds.
things that we're doing,
So
but
there
one
are
of the
many
things that we
different
struggle with
factors
doing.
that contribute
One of the things we
to your
struggle with
staff
is
and
special
inmate
needs.
ratio here.
I'll go through a little bit of
And, we
statistical
are
information
really
here,
confident that
just to let
the
you know
new
where we're
design
at.
will bring
In
a
2017,
higher level of efficiency between
with my mental
the
health in
staff
the jail
and inmate
and
ratio.
their interviews with the inmates that come in, 78% of the
Good evening.
inmates had
If you haven't
some
met me
sort of
before, my
addiction
name is
issue.
Patrick Aaron. I'm the
whether it
county
be,
administrator
you know,
around here.
alcohol,
It's called the
drugs,
Numbers
what have
Guy.
you.
So I want to talk a little
68%
bit about
had
the
a
question
mental
that was
illness.
asked before about a jail
You know,
offsite.
not a serious mental illness, but been diagnosed at one point in time with some sort of
Was
mental illness.
Clearly raised the
And,
safety issue. So what dollar value do you want
28%,
me to put on the safety of an officer,
had both
for the
an
public,
addiction
or the inmate,
and a
when we constantly have to
diagnosis with
move them
mental
back and
illness.
forth, in and out?
4% was a seriously mentally ill.
2,
That
and this comes
4%
into play in a
say that
different area,
it may have been in a
at least half
hospital
the
or something
prisoners
to
are going
that
to
nature.
mental court. Right now, you
Just
never
give you
see
a quick
it. You
idea,
never leave the
and to
secure
handle
environment.
this population, which
All
is
those
well
prisoners
above
would be out of the
50%
secure
of our
environment going
population,
forward.
I have
More
7
importantly,
housing beds for
importantly,
those.
who you are,
Is
is right now the sheriff handles all that
addiction.
transporting back
Someone
and
going
forth
through
to the
withdrawal or
court.
something like that.
If that jail
which
is
is very
offsite,
cumbersome.
then the area
And
that
that's
the
a daily
district
battle,
that charged
and
them,
that my
the city,
my
the
jail staff
village,
have to,
whoever charged them is
work with
responsible to
daily.
transport them back and forth. So
Um,
then you'll have all the villages
And
having
same
to
thing
send
with medical.
officers
I mean,
from Doylestown,
my medical
from
population
Worcester, from Orville,
has to tie up
over
the
to the
same
new
beds.
jail,
So I got
pick up the
7
prisoners,
beds to work
take them to meeting
with
court,
mental
wait
health
there,
as
take
well as
them
our
back to the
medical.
court,
So
and then go
so
back
that
to the
becomes very
district.
cumbersome.
How many villages, cities
now,
want to hire additional
the
police
jail was
staff
designed
just to move
for-
prisoners? That right
Well,
now
the
are
state
being
says we
moved
can
at
hold
no
80
charge to them.
prisoners.
And in a more secure
Currently, our
zone.
population,
How do you put a
general
dollar
population is
value on that
120
part?
beds. So,
We can put
and
staff
we have 2
numbers.
isolation cells.
The inconvenience of
So,
all the other entities.
the higher your population gets, the more problems you're going to have with your inmate population.
Another question was, how
because of
much
the
does the
stress
study
levels,
cost? The study
so
cost
many
us
people
about
being
$40,000.
packed into a cell.
If we go ahead and build the jail, then that
You have a
comes off
small
the price
area
of the
with,
building.
for instance, one of my cell
The
blocks has
architectural
28
cost of
prisoners,
building the jail.
and the state says I'm only supposed
We
to
had a
have
couple
14 in
questions
there.
concerning the pay.
So, this all
Why not just
combined
bring
brings the
back the
stress
pay
levels,
state?
and they, you know, we've
It's a
had
great
more
question.
incidents
But in order to
in the
answer that
past
question, we need to go back to
year.
why did the pay to state
For
come about
instance,
in the
in
first year?
2000 and
I've been here long
let's
enough to
see,
have that answer. I look at the
2015,
sheriff's
our
office, most of us have
incident
been here long
levels
enough,
were.
2 days ago. At the point the pay to stay was built, we had a waiting list of people to go to jail of over 500 people. I don't think we have that waiting list today.
We had right around 800.
More importantly, if you were on the waiting list
between 8 and
for, I
900
think it was
incident
5
reports.
years,
This year alone,
then
we're.
you were gone. You didn't have to go to jail anymore.
1,000 reports.
and
just
we had people that
incidents
were on a
throughout-
waiting list
throughout
long
the
enough
jail.
that they never served us.
What kind of incidents I'm talking about? Inmate on
So
inmate
we put the
violence.
pay to stay in place to give them-
talking
because these
about,
people were out in
you know,
the street
destruction
anyway.
of jail property.
Most of them
things
would
that nature.
qualify
So,
to be at
so
work
you
during
see
the
a
day,
big
they had a
increase
job.
when you see
At
a
night, come in and
population
report, or
increase.
go to work at
and-
night, depending on where they
and
work.
it becomes harder to manage.
If we had
the
enough
inmate.
volume
Actually,
that we could
the
work
inmate
down that waiting
becomes the
list
manager
through
because
the
they're
pay to
managing
stay
your time. And so it's
And
time
you
to
also had
do
jobs for them
the-
to go
the
to.
other duties that you're required to do.
The people we're serving now are not the same type
I'll
of
give you a short
population.
history on the
We
population.
don't have the waiting list.
In
We have to suppress usage. They're
2015,
not
we
going
had an
to-
average
they're
daily
not sentencing.
population
But they're
per
not
year
the
of
same type of
109
offender.
inmates.
Okay,
2016
they're not
went to
as many of the
117.
DUIs or those types of things.
2017
It's more
was
of a
at
drug
130,
related
and this
or
year
a
so far
crime
we're at
related to drug
136. So as you
The
see, the
concept of
number
a pay to
is
stay per se
going
is
up.
not gonna alleviate
And
the
from
problem.
from what the sheriff was saying
That
earlier,
doesn't
it's
mean
always
that
been
we
a
can't
constant
work
battle.
on looking at the
trying
jail
to
or
stay
the
ahead of
old
the
jail,
game
and maybe we
and-
have
and
some
trying
kind of a
to,
reporting system.
get beds
We
for
might be able to do
prisoners.
something like that, and that's gonna be
Today,
part of the further evaluations that we do.
We had 20,
But the
we
concept
had
of the
20
old
inmates
pay
out of
to stay,
county.
one, near the end of the
We're
program, it
housing
didn't
them
pay.
in Ashland County, Stark
Okay,
County,
we were just
Huron
housing
County,
people and paying.
Morrow
We
County,
weren't
and
getting
Richland
revenue
County.
from it.
So we're
People
housing
didn't have
them
work,
wherever we can find
and there weren't
space
enough
to house
volume
them.
of people that
And
qualified
that's
for the program.
getting harder as
When
well.
it opened, it was full. When it
For
closed, it
instance,
wasn't
because
even
other
half.
counties are having the same issues as we're
So
having.
it was a great concept and it
Increased
worked for a
population.
while.
What's
but it's not
driving
really
that?
fit for
Well, the
today's-
opiates
for today's-
issue that we were
for today's
having
inmates.
last year, that's down a little bit, but, you know, we're seeing a lot of the results coming from that. State legislation's changing.
And there was a question about
overcrowding,
why not keep
putting
it
a lot
fixed
of
up
the
the
burden back on local communities
existing
to
jail
house inmates
for
that
the
would
people that
normally
have to
go
go
to
to court
prison,
and
they're
then
staying
have another
locally
jail
now.
somewhere else.
So
Well,
there's things that
we
are
already talked
driving
about
the
the
numbers
concept
up.
of having a jail,
and-
using the old jail and building a new one,
causing-
and the
causing
staffing
issues
of
that we're seeing.
71, that's without the.
That's a little bit of the operational
You'd be up to a
issues
staff
that we're
of
seeing in the
90 people, probably
county
have a
jail.
jail in one place
But,
and a jail in another,
you know,
and try to
let's talk
keep
about
going
the
back
building a
and
little
forth.
bit. I know,
It's just
for
not gonna
instance, you know, you look at the building, it looks like a
I
nice
think there was
building.
another
You go
question
take
that
a
I
tours
thought
of the
was
facility. I gotta hand it to my staff for a 40-year-old building.
Yeah, I have a
They keep the
question
floors
here
shining, they
which,
keep the brass doorknobs shined, and they
After I speak, I'll
keep the
ask
walls
the other
painted.
judges if
So
they
it
wanna
looks
add
very,
to it.
fairly nice.
Since
But
with
when you start
70
to look at the guts of the building, you know.
Thanks, Jamie. Next, we'll
a
have
couple
Judge
years
Mark
ago,
Weiss
maintenance man
come
took
forward
out a
and
hot
speak
water
to
pipe, a
the
2-inch hot water pipe,
problems
and,
with the judicial
you know, I couldn't even get my fingers through it because
face
of all the
stuff that was inside the pipe. You know, problem with electrical issues, we'll be up on the floor and we will, you know, push electrical, you know, panel and push a button to open this door, and a door across the way will open up.
Thank you.
Which is a security
I'm
issue.
gonna try to give
So we
a
have to
little
look at things like that, get
perspective.
maintenance up there and fix them, and
think between
plug
the
a,
sheriff's
you know, something into an outlet like a buffer or something like that to above the floor, and it's constantly tripping breakers. So you have issues like that throughout the facility. Plumbing issues. One of the big complaints we have is when this inmate flushes his toilet, it backflows into another toilet across the way, which is pretty nasty, but it doesn't. So they have to flush their toilet at the same time to get the items to go down.
As the sheriff said,
So
December
it just gives you an
5th,
idea
December
of
7th. As I was going
some of
back
the
to my
issues
car,
we're
probably
dealing
100
with.
feet away from
The
that,
building was
somebody
designed
stopped
back
me
in
and asked me where the
1977.
jail was. Which
Jail designs have changed considerably since then. We
I
have
had
what we
neighbors
consider
who
a
asked
cell
me
block.
what jail was. And, it's a
Jails
big,
designed
ugly
today are
brick
modular in
building.
design where I can stand in the control area and see every aspect of what the inmates are doing in their pods. Whereas
The jail's always
we call
been
them
in
sight
downtown
lines
Worcester. When I
as
started
well.
practicing
In our jail
law,
today, there
probably
is no
the
sight
only
lines. I can
person
stand where
in here
the
that
officer
was-
stationed is at, and I cannot see any of the inmates. I have to go and physically go into that block and actually see what's going on
Okay.
and that sort of thing.
I'm not
And
afraid
one
to
officer
show
will
how old I am.
control 2 or 3 different cell blocks depending on what level he is
61.
on at the jail. So there's just a couple of
I took the
design
bench in
issues.
1980 as a municipal court judge
You know, our
for 3
current
years.
facility, one of the common trends, one of the problems we're having
When I
is
was a
drugs.
municipal court
You know,
judge, the DUI
people
law,
bringing drugs into the facility.
1 sentence.
We are not capable or not able to do cavity searches on everyone that comes into the facility. And we have a lot of time people bringing drugs into the facility
It's
and
now
getting them
9
upstairs.
pages.
A lot of jails are going to body scanners. Well, our current
The
facility,
jail, the one thing I
body
forgot
scanners
to
are largely
mention, Ron
designed,
Armstead, did
and
you
the
know your
current
names
facility
on that
has no
file?
space for one. We would have to modify it and figure out where we would put something to that
He
nature.
was the mayor of
But,
Warville.
So that's another issue that
But
we're having. We've talked to
In
people about it,
1980,
but that's just an issue.
the jail
Another design,
population, I don't know exactly
This is
what
a,
it was.
this is a
but
crazy
it's not a
design.
big
They
issue when I
place
was
maximum
a kid.
security
But in
cell
the late
blocks on
80s
the
and
same
the
floor with our
90s,
kitchen, where there's
We
knives,
got
cutting materials,
mandatory
and things like
DUI
that.
sentence.
And also on with
Domestic
laundry,
violence
medicals
became
on
a
the same
crime.
floor.
When I was
So
a
now you're
municipal
transporting
judge, it
maximum
wasn't even
security
a
and
crime.
make behind,
There were
beside
other
by all these
tough on
doors daily.
crime laws which
So there's issues
just gradually build up the
that we're
population
dealing with
to
as
where,
well.
where you'll hear from Tom Weber.
Let's talk
where
about
it's been
what the
for
state
a number
says,
of years.
where we're at. Each year we have an inspection by the state.
So,
And we do
what
well
I
in the
wanna
state
talk
inspection.
about
We
really are
usually,
two things.
Let me explain a
The
little
main
bit. There
thing
are
is, and
over
you'll hear
300
this from
state
Tom
standards.
Weber, is what we
There
call
are essential
suppressed
standards, which are
usage.
mandatory. You have to pass
Just
those
today, I had
standards
3 or
each
4
year.
cases of
And there are important
sentencing,
standards,
probation
which
violations.
they split in half,
where
and those are done every other year. Now,
these
when you're
people
inspected
should've
on the
gone to
important
jail
standards,
for
you have to pass
30,
90% of
60
those to pass
In
the
one
state
case,
inspections.
I just
Where we
gave
fall
you credit
short
for the time they served up to
is
that
on the
point.
square footage.
Another case, I cut it
Our
in half.
average cell space is
Every
55
day
square
we
foot
get calls,
feet.
can you release
Okay,
somebody early?
and our cell, the majority of our
Try to
cells are all
comply
double
with
bunk.
that.
And the
So,
square footage required by the state is 100 square feet for double bunk
As you
stacked
hear,
like
there
a
is a
bunk
need
beds.
for a much
If
larger
the bunks
jail,
are
but
side by side,
the
they're required to
suppressed
be 110
usage
square
is
feet.
one of the reasons that
We
the
don't come
capacity of the
nowhere near
projected
that.
new jail is
State standard
between
says for one
about
person,
240,
it has to be 75 square
250.
feet. Well, we don't even need
Because
that. We're at
people
55
that should
square
be in
feet.
jail now are
But-
getting out
but
early
the,
or not going at all.
So that's an issue that we have with the state,
So
as
listen
well
to
as
the part about suppressed use.
modified dormitories.
The other thing we're gonna get.
We have that issue because we don't need
we've
square
been
footage for that.
Dealing with
space
this for
as
the
well.
last 4 or 5 years.
The lighting,
Is this
we
the
have a lot of
overpopulation
dark
of the
areas
state
in the
prison.
jail that doesn't meet the lighting
Every
standards,
effort the
nighttime lighting or
legislature has made
daytime
over the
lighting.
last 4 or 5 years to reduce population.
Upkeep and maintenance,
has really
the older the
failed.
facility get,
And
the harder their
eventually-
upkeep and the
but
maintenance
what they
is.
keep doing
We got hit this past year because
is
of the upkeep
pushing
and
back,
maintenance. We've
pushing
had,
people out.
you know, with the large windows that we have,
Felony
those
fives,
are,
which are the
cracked
lowest
probably
level
at least
felonies, we
a
cannot
couple a
send
year.
to prison.
And we currently have
So,
3, I believe, that needs
We're
to be
gonna
replaced.
get
maybe
more and more
4.
pushback from the
And
state
they're
because they don't
$2,000
plan
a
to
pop.
build any new prisons.
So,
And they
so that adds up after a while.
130%
And many
over
times
capacity.
are we able to determine
So
who
that's another
who,
factor which is gonna
has
push
cracked these
back
windows.
on the
Well, if we
county
find out, we
and
charge them
require
and
more
we expect
jail
them to,
space.
reimburse for that. But many times, the inmate's not gonna tell on an inmate, and if they did, are they
The
reliable
only
source
other
or not?
comment,
So,
and I think I kind of
so we have those
referred
issues
to it,
going on as
as
well.
I said, the jail's always been downtown. And really.
One of the
and
cell blocks, the state says
proposed
that
plan
we
that
have
you're
28
gonna hear
inmates in
about
there, and we have 2
is to
showers,
build,
2 sinks, and 2
a new
toilets.
building in the
They did give me a
parking
variance
area
because
north
we workers in there and that.
Facilities.
But, you know, there's supposed to
And
be
in my opinion,
one shower per 12 one seat
Since
for
there's been
12
some
inmates
question
and one
about
toilet
why
for
are we
12
building
inmates.
it
So,
downtown.
you know,
It
the
would
state
be a
works with
waste
us
of time and
and
money to
helps us
to
out in
build
some of these
anywhere
different
else.
areas, but the standard is a standard is a standard, and
Unless
and in
the
long
city
run,
or the
something were to
county
happen
has
and
some
things like
land
that,
right
it could
within
be
the city,
potentially used
because
against us.
The key is it needs to be
And
near the
Howard
courts,
talks about
because
the
you have
violent
people
from the
going
nonviolent.
back and forth.
But those are some of the
to
issues that
courts
we're dealing with
every
today.
day.
And
Currently, and the new
thank you for
proposal
your
will
time.
allow
I
for
appreciate it,
a
and I'll go ahead and turn it back over.
bridge from the municipal court.
Pardon?
How many beds are you licensed for?
The state says we're permitted 80
Common police
inmates,
court,
and
which
we
is a
have
couple blocks away,
and we
we
have
have to
an average daily
transport,
population. of
although we do
130
some
visitors.
hearings by
Yeah.
video.
Or
But I think it would be a
136
major mistake to even go down that road.
Thanks, Jamie. Next, we'll have Judge Mark Weiss come forward and
Making it
speak to
state.
the
I don't know where you-
problems that the judicial
Yeah.
people
You got
face
security, you got
by
costs.
having not enough judges.
Oh,
I could go on.
and
and on.
we have note cards for
If you
people
look
to
at
write
any
down
state prison, when they build a new
questions.
state
If you don't
prison,
have them, we'll get them to you,
it's
and
right
then when you
next
have
to
a
the,
question
you know,
written, if you want to hold it up, we'll come
people
around
that
and pick it up.
learn to live there. have
Right,
accepted
thank
it.
you.
And
I'm
state
going to try to
prison
give
looks
a
lot
little
different than
perspective.
what we have downtown.
I think between the sheriff's officials
I'll turn it
and
over to,
Tom Weber and Greg Strollo, they will more than adequately demonstrate why the current, continuing with the current
8%
jail is
inmates
just
having
untenable.
addiction issues, 68%
I stopped
mental
by the
illness,
jail on my way home
48%
today. I wanted to look at the plaque. So I
Shouldn't
couldn't
these
remember
people
exactly
be
when it
getting
was
treatment instead of
dedicated or
incarceration?
opened. And as the sheriff said, it was December 1st, 1977. As I was going back to my car, probably 100 feet away from that, some guy stopped me and asked me where the jail was, which
The biggest.
I have neighbors who've asked me where the jail was. You know, it's a big, ugly brick building, but it really doesn't look much like a jail if you just look at it,
Child rape
stand there and
cases
look at
right
it.
now.
The jail's always been in downtown Worcester. When I started practicing law, and I'm probably the only person in here that can give you this background. I used to visit clients in the jail across the street where you get dinner
Lower
now.
level felonies.
Okay?
Most of those people.
I'm not afraid to show how old I
Keep in the
am.
community on probation. They're not in jail
61.
unless they violate probation. We have a drug court.
I took the
with-
bench in
which,
1980 as a
Jeff
municipal court
operates.
judge for 3 years.
Have a reentry court which actually deals with
When I
people coming out
was
of
a
prison.
municipal court judge, the
Mental
DUI
health court,
law
which I
was
had
one
for about 10
sentence.
years. I
No
have not
person under the influence of
continued that in the
alcohol
last year because
and/or
of
drugs
numbers.
shall operate a
We have a
vehicle in this
probation
state.
department.
It's
which
now
has
9
day
pages.
reporting, intensive supervision. We
The
have
jail,
people in
the
treatment
one
at
thing I forgot to
180
mention,
and
Ron
Anazao.
Amstutz, did you know your name's on that
And we have a
plaque?
probation department that's
Okay.
underpaid and understaffed, and they do amazing.
He was the mayor of Orville.
At least 3 of the officers are paid through a state grant because we're able to keep
In
people out of
1980,
prison, so they give us money because we're doing that.
The
So
jail
we are-
population,
with the
I don't know
resources we
exactly what it
have,
was, but it was not a big issue when I was in
If you
municipal
put
court.
aside the people
in the
that
late
have
80s and
bond
the
they're usually
90s,
on pretty serious
We got
offenses,
mandatory
or the
DUI
people who, as Judge
sentencing,
Van Sickle pointed
domestic
out,
violence became a crime.
failing
When I
to
was a
show up
municipal
for
judge,
court. I
it
just
wasn't
had
even a
person
crime.
Today, they had 4 different.
There were other tough
drug
on
possession cases.
crime laws which
Low level,
just
out
gradually
with a
build up the
recog bond.
population to where
They
it,
don't show
where
up.
you'll hear
while they're
from
out, they
Tom
get a
Weber,
second
you
case.
know, where it's been for a
Get
number
another
of years.
recog bond, because they're not out there shooting anybody.
So,
they're just shooting
what I want to
themselves,
talk about
mainly.
really are 2
And
things.
by the time
The main thing is,
you get
and you'll
done,
hear
they have
this
4 or
from
5
Tom
drug
Weber, is what we
possession
call
cases. So
suppressed
at some point,
usage.
you gotta lock them up, so they'll
Just
show up
today, I
in
had
court.
3 or 4 cases of
but
sentencing,
Overall,
probation
we bend
violations,
over backwards
where
to keep people out of that jail.
these people should have gone to jail for
So,
30, 60
with
days.
what we've got, I
In
think
one
we're
case,
doing the
I
best
just
we
gave them
can.
credit for the
I
time
don't know
they'd
if
served
Judge
up to
Spindler
that
wanted
point. Another case, I cut it in half. Every day we get calls, can you release somebody early? We try to comply with that. So,
I mean, I'm tempted to say, well, what Judge Weiss said.
as you'll hear, there is a need for
You
a much larger
incarceration
jail,
as a
but
last resort. resort for people who are struggling.
The suppressed usage is one of the reasons that the capacity of the projected new jail is going to be in the about 245, 250. Because people that should be in jail now are getting out early or not going at all.
Our probation department has been.
So listen to the part about suppressed usage. The other thing we're going to get, and we've been dealing with this for the last 4 or 5 years, is the overpopulation of the state prisons. Every effort the legislature has made over the last 4 or 5 years to reduce population has really failed. And eventually, but what they keep doing is pushing back, pushing people out. Felony 5s, which are the lowest level felonies, we cannot send to prison now. So we're going to get more and more pushback from the state because they don't plan to build any new prisons, and they're 130% over capacity. So that's another factor which is going to push back on the county and require more jail space.
Willing to get the treatment, or willing to
see if there was anything else.
Willing to do what they got to do to follow the law.
The only other comment, and I think I kind of
The sad reality is
referred to it, is, as I said, the jail's always been downtown. And really, and the proposed plan that you're going to hear about is to build a new building in the parking area north of the existing facilities. And in my opinion, because there's been some question about why are we building it downtown, it would be a waste of time and money to go anywhere else.
And sometimes we're out of options.
Unless the city or the county has some land right within the city, because the key is it needs to be near the courts, because you have people going back and forth to the courts every day. Currently, and the new proposal will allow for a bridge from the municipal court to the jail. Common Police Court, which is a couple blocks away, they have to transport, although we do some hearings by video. But I think it would be a major mistake to even go down that road of
and I'll tell you, one of the hardest decisions
looking at space. I don't know where you would look.
Is, for instance, when
you got security, you got costs.
Bring us the sheet. We get it every day.
I could go on and on.
We need more.
If you look at any state prison, when they build a new state prison,
as a judge,
it's right next to the old one.
Generally, somebody that's criminally
people have learned to live there, have accepted it.
Like
and a state prison looks a lot different than what we have downtown.
Or
so,
aggravated menacing.
I'll turn it over to, I think,
we need you, Judge
Van Sickle.
And you look at the sheet, and then you're deciding, all right, which one of these people do I let out? This is it really.
In touching on the touching on the reasons why we're in the position where we're at, Judge Weiss wrote it on paper. I got it on my cell phone here. A few things. First of all, when it comes to the administration of justice, a lot of people don't realize the impact that a lack of jail space has on the ability of the court system to properly administer justice, and that affects everybody in the county. And the reason, one of the problems that we run into is, it wouldn't be unusual to come in on a Monday morning and find that there's been 10, 15 people that have been picked up on outstanding warrants over the course of the weekend for failure to appear for court proceedings. So now we have to reset their case, and the court has to decide upon the appropriate bond amount to set for these people. And in general, we'd like to give people signature bonds so that they can be out of jail pending their hearing, but a lot of these folks don't show up time and time again. And with a lack of jail space, we don't have the luxury of holding people that have earned it because they never show up for court. And what that does is it delays cases because they don't show up, and the case gets bumped down the road sometimes up to 6-9 months because they're AWOL, they got an outstanding warrant. Well, in the meantime, witnesses move away, people forget things, and there are cases that literally fall apart because the defendant has delayed the proceedings long enough that the state can't prosecute. And some people deserve to have a cash bond set, but we don't have that luxury on most of the cases because we don't have the room for them to sit waiting on their proceeding. So that's one of the things that we deal with a lot. As Judge Weiss touched upon, especially in municipal court, we have mandatory sentencing. Whether you agree with it or not, if you're caught driving under an OVI suspension, I've got to give you 3 days in jail. I don't have the discretion not to give you 3 days. And I know that gives the jail problems because we got guys showing up for 3 days, and you get a lot of them, it adds up. So to some degree, we don't have discretion on who we send there. And there's been you may have heard of Marcy's Law, which was passed recently, which gives an increased emphasis on victims' rights. And the court is required to make sure that the victim of a case gets notice and an opportunity to give input on decisions that affect them. But when I have somebody sitting in jail on a case where they've been sentenced and the jail calls up and says, hey, we need some beds, I can't just, with a stroke of a pen, let somebody out without giving the victim now an opportunity to at least weigh in on that. You can imagine the surprise that somebody would have if they assumed that their abuser was still in jail over the weekend, but they got cut loose on a Friday because we didn't have the bed space. These are the things that impact our community as a whole and that we need to get on top of. It was summed up pretty well at the end of yesterday's meeting that the current situation is just untenable. And you know, God bless the corrections officers for making it work, because I've seen exactly how bad it is. I've stood in the pod surrounded by an overcrowded population. No one wants to be there. The inmates don't like it. The corrections officers have a big job on their hands, and you know, it's only a matter of time until something really bad happens. So that's the impact that this system has on our ability to administer justice in this county. And so I just wanted to share that with you because it's important, and we deal with it every single day. It used to be kind of rare that I would get a case where someone was charged with assault for a fight in the jailhouse. Now they're coming in much more frequently. So they're actually adding up cases. We're doing more and more cases because of the overcrowding in the jail. And that's something that we try to obviously avoid. But the bottom line is it's basically time for a reality check. Things are great in Wayne County. I wouldn't raise my family anywhere else. But we've got, just like any other area, we've got people in this county that will hurt others and that break the law. And we have to have the tools to deal with it appropriately. And right now, we got a Band-Aid on it. And so that's why we're at where we're at. And I just want to share that with you from the municipal court's perspective. I'm pretty sure Judge Rickett would echo everything that I've said, but it's a problem, and that's where we find ourselves.
Thank you very much, judges and sheriff. We appreciate the outline. Our president of the board, Sue Smale, made some preliminary introductions to our architect and justice system specialist team, but I want to just bring them up here now so that they can actually deliver what we're all here for tonight, to hear this report. Mention that Greg Strollo is the principal at Strollo Associates. He has had more than $2 billion worth of projects that he's led as the principal over his time in his profession so far, and a fair number of those are justice projects, and some of them are right here in Ohio, many of them are. He has had recognition very recently as actually the president of the Ohio chapter of the American Institute of Architects, which he says hurt his business for a year or so while he was doing that, but it's an important position. He's also served at the county level as the president of a local corrections board, so he has that background. We'd have Tom Weber here, who is a national expert that's been recognized nationally again and again for his programming and planning expertise in space utilization for justice systems.
He has policy and procedure analyst experience with the National Institute of Corrections. In fact, he is their advisor for that, and also performs a lot of jail inspections for the National Institute of Corrections. So he'll be involved in the presentation tonight as well. And then we have, I believe, a cousin of Mr. Strollo, another Strollo that was referred to as J. Pat, and he comes to us with 48 years of justice system expertise as a criminal justice architect, and he's received national recognition as a leader in criminal justice planning and design. And I have a whole page of single-space projects that he's been involved in, police department projects, justice systems, operations centers, public safety projects, and many jail projects. So we're happy that this team comes to us with work that is regularly used by the National Institute of Justice, the U.S. Department of Justice for other counties and jurisdictions as tour sites. Their projects are considered models and at the leading edge of what we need today. So we're thankful that they've come to help us understand this better. I'm going to turn it over to them right now. Greg?
Thanks, Ron. Thank you. I'm going to try and do this two-handed. I'm going to try and give you an idea of what we were asked to do, which was essentially a four-part process. The first of which was to really do sort of a deep dive into the, if you'll permit me, my eyes aren't what they used to be. Do a deep dive into the historical database of the basis, to establish a basis for our projections, really looking at about 15 years of history in the jail. Second phase was to develop projections that would be useful to populate a space planning exercise. That third phase was to develop that space plan and do some test fits. And the fourth is to do some operational analysis with respect to costs and staffing. So we're going to need, J. Pat, can you advance these for me? That's the one on the right. Okay. Okay, I just went through those phases. We did that already. Okay. So to give you an idea, the kind of support that we got from the Corrections Planning Board and specifically the Sheriff's Department was really pretty extraordinary. Hats off to Mike Smucker and Jamie for the, I want to say, best organized data we received from any county in recent years. Really well kept, accurate information that allowed us to populate the projections. The entire Community Corrections Planning Board, the elected officials, both the judges and the commissioners were actively involved in these projections. Supporting agencies, mental health, and medical and addiction specialists were also involved. And it really was a collaborative effort to get where we are. I'm going to ask to go to the next one. And it really isn't that complicated. We looked at who's in the jail, why they're there, how long they stay. This is Tom's expertise. He does this all over the country. I'm going to turn it over to Tom.
Thank you, and thank you, Greg, and again, thank you for coming tonight. My name is Tom Weber. As I was introduced, I am a corrections guy. I'm not an architect. The two architects do the design work. What I do is I try to translate kind of operational needs with these guys into bringing about reasonable and efficient design. And because jails are a very complicated building, and we're going to talk about that. They're regulated heavily by statutes, by administrative codes, by policies, lots of case law out there, lots of different things that impact jail operations. And so I've been working in and around jails and around court programs for over 30 years now. So what I do is I come in and I look at the jail operation, and what I like to do is first analyze the jail population and try to determine how the jail has been used historically, because that will oftentimes tell you what you need to plan for in the future and if those uses were to continue. So when we look at the data and we look at it here, it tells us who's in the jail, why they are in the jail, how long they are in the jail, how jail bed days are being consumed by different groups. We're going to talk about that, and the captain talked a little bit about minimum, medium, max inmates, males and females, special populations, the detox, the drug addicted, the mentally ill. Almost everything that I'm going to show you tonight in very general terms can be broken down into those subpopulations. And as Greg mentioned, the jail here does an excellent job of tracking those by very specific populations. I'm not going to bore all of you with a lot of that data, but what I can tell you is we looked at it, and this is what we found, what you're going to be seeing. And it was very important to establish that historical usage of the jail so that we could set projections and forecasts. And I'm going to explain what the difference is between projections and forecasts as we get into this. First thing you have to understand when you're looking at jail populations, even though it's a very complex and very, very difficult thing to get your arms around, you look at jail populations in two primary categories, and that's how many are coming in, which is bookings and admissions, and how long are they staying. Now, you do this with adult populations, which we call inmates. We do it with juvenile offenders as well, which we typically call securely confined or residential care or out-of-home placements. In this particular case, when we started, we looked at both adults and juveniles because we wanted to start to analyze maybe where some of the trends were with the kids as well, and what were some of the services perhaps that the juveniles were going to need. We're now focusing on the adults as a result of that, so we're not going to be addressing any juvenile delinquency discussion tonight, but I wanted to give the background that we did look at that as well. And a lot of the things that's going on there translates over to the adult arena as well. So one of the first things we look at is bookings. And you can see over about the last 8 years since 2010, you've actually been fairly consistent. I know that red line looks like it's got a big dip in it, but basically you've been between 2,500 and 3,000 bookings annually. If you were to project that out over 10 years, it stays fairly flat to about 3,000, so I'm not too concerned about bookings having a huge impact on your future jail populations, because your back usage shows it's been fairly stable, fairly predictable at about 3,000 bookings per year. So then we start to look at ALOS, which is average length of stay. It's how long everybody that gets booked in the jail, so out of those 3,000 inmates approximately, what is their average length of stay in the jail? And what you can see is in this county it has ranged between 12 and about 18 on the high, but for the most part it has been pretty predictable around 15. Now I know again from looking at hundreds of jails around the country that when you have an average length of stay at this level, that's actually not a bad average. It's not a bad average for one primary reason. You don't have a major swing from say 10 or 12 to 20 to 25 or 30. You don't have real big fluctuations in your length of stay. In this particular case, when you do the 10-year projection, you're not out very far. You're not out any higher than your 18. Now, it may have some influence on the rise of your population overall, your averages, because what happens is when you take your bookings and you take your average length of stays, that creates what your ADP is. Now, we looked at 15 years of data and we tried to determine what years of use is what's really going to be showing and predicting the future. So we started at 15 years and you look at all the fluctuations, then we broke it to 10, then we looked at 8, and what we realized was really about the last 3 years is when you've started to experience significant rises in your jail population. And if you look at the ADP since 2015, the 10-year projection gets it out slightly over 200 at around 210 inmates is what we are projecting. Now, I said I would define what a projection and a forecast is. A projection assumes there's going to be no changes from all the dynamics and all the variables that occurred in this 3-year time frame so that you could project out to the future the same type of populations and trends that you've experienced in the recent 3 years. That's what a projection is. A forecast starts to take a look at other types of predictable or known factors that may have an influence on that projection. Let me give you an example. If, for instance, you knew that a law was going to be changing, and the judge mentioned years ago when you started getting minimum mandatory sentences for different things, 3 days for operating without a driver's license, things like that. If you knew that was coming, you could forecast into your projection that you're going to be receiving more inmates because of this change of law for this type of an offender. So if you have the data on how many people were booked for driving without a license, you could start to forecast how many more jail beds they're going to consume. You start to apply projections, which are the known variables, into your projections. You start to factor those, and you come up with forecasts. One of the challenges that we had here, and the judge mentioned that I'd be talking about this, is what was and has the impact of suppressed usage been on the projections? Because this 3 years of data that's over here has been with all kinds of effort not to use the jail, this suppressed usage issue. So if you build a jail big enough where suppressed usage comes off, that cap, that lid comes off, what's it going to do to the population? So to look at that, we start to look at what have the peaks been in the population in this jail. You can see that the peaks have been quite a bit higher than the average daily population. The peak is how many inmates were held at the highest point each day of any specific month by male and female status, because they may not have happened on the same day. You might have had 200 men in on one day and 50 women during the same month, but you start to aggregate that data, you start to look at what the peak population is, and you can see that where we were at about an anticipated 210 inmates that were going to be your average daily population in 10 years. Now when we start factoring in what the peak populations were, we're up to over 250 beds needed in the jail to meet the needs, the anticipated needs, the projected needs, if you will, 10 years from now, if all else remains the same. Because we're dealing with peaks. I can tell you that on Sunday nights or Monday mornings, the jail here was probably at peak populations because you had 3 days of inmates getting arrested, and they're sitting there, and the first thing that the jail administrator, the lieutenant, has to do is start calling probation, asking who can get out of jail, or how they can bond more people out, or whatever it is. That's your peaking factor. Jails that are stable, and they usually have a lot of available jail bed space, their peaking factor is usually somewhere around 5 to 10% in addition to their ADP, okay? The suppressed usage here has a very difficult, it's a difficult figure to try to even estimate, but here's what I can tell you. The difference between 250, 260 beds and 210 is more like 25%. So your swing between your ADP and your peak is more like 25%. Not the 5 to 10% that might be typical where there's available jail beds. And I'm attributing a lot of that to this suppressed usage issue. So looking at the peak here is probably a more critical factor in trying to determine what the future jail bed demands are as opposed to ADP, but we factor all of those things in when we start to make some of these projections and forecasts. So here's kind of a summary, and we were asked to look at this 15 and 20 years down the road, and early on in this project I said it's kind of all baloney after 10 years. It's really becomes too difficult to project accurately what the needs are. You could throw a straight line projection out there for 100 years if you want to, but I can tell you things don't stay stable that long with laws in our country. There are constantly revisions that are going on that are getting more strict. There's currently some discussion at the state level here that any felony probationer or parolee who tests positive for opiates get a minimum mandatory 30 days in jail or be required to do residential treatment at their expense. Well, I can tell you most of the people that are coming into the jail, if they're high on drugs, they don't have the money to spend 30 days on residential treatment. So they're going to be doing 30 days in jail. What's that going to do to the jail population? We don't know. But when those laws come about, it spikes your population. So it makes it difficult to try to project or forecast beyond 10 years of time. So we focus on what's going to happen in 10 years. So what we expect is, by looking at the averages, we feel that there's going to be some sort of a need for about 150 to 175 beds for your male population. Those are about 75 to 80% of all the inmates that are in this jail are men. So when we look at this range, we look at the male population within 10 years. The average daily population, not the peak, is somewhere between 150 and 175. And on average, over those 3 years, you heard the jail administrator say that the ADP, total ADP, around 130. The men make up about 110 of those inmates. For the women, their current ADP is roughly 25 inmates if you look at those 3 years of data. We are anticipating that their average daily bed use range is going to be 35 to 45 beds. So you can see that the ADP, the average daily population, is going to be somewhere on the low end of about 185, and on the high end somewhere near 225, 240, thereabouts. So as we looked at this, we started to try to determine what are some of the other space needs that are going to be accounted for with this jail, in addition to beds. Because what happens is, when you start to figure out what the total bed need is, then you start to break it down by classifications for those types of offenders that you're serving in the jail. Not only do you look at those minimum, medium, max, you also, of course, look at the gender issue, male and female, but you also look at all those special populations that the jail administrator referenced, such as mentally ill, detox, suicide watch, segregation, discipline problems, assaultive, the ones that are highly dangerous, maybe capital level offenders. You have a number of different classifications that require different types of housing options in the jail. Not every inmate can be placed in a 2-person cell. Many of them have to be in 1-person cells. Now, not every cell also has to be two-person cells. Some could be 4-person cells. Some could be 8-person cells. We could have a 32, a 36, or a 64-bed dorm. There are populations here. The minimum population, minimum male population, is very appropriate here to be housed in a dormitory style. That's kind of a no-cell look, kind of like an army barracks almost. No walls, complete lines of visibility, open bunks, and essentially looking at however big you want that to be. 64 beds is possible here in our concepts that you're going to be seeing shortly. But we start to look at what are all of these spaces, and we start to look at where are these spaces located adjacent to important functions in that operation. The judge mentioned as well that one of the real concerns in any jail is, how do you get your inmates back and forth to court safely and securely? Every time that an inmate has to move from the secure confines of that jail envelope, there's a risk. There's a risk to that inmate, there's a risk to the public, there's a risk to the staff. The less inmate movement that you have, the more safe it is. That's what the history tells us throughout our nation. So we try to reduce movement, inmate movement and transport as much as possible. Not only when they're having to go to court, but also within that housing unit. And again, some of the design options that you're going to see is going to show how most things can occur now right in a properly designed housing unit instead of the facility. It reduces that inmate movement, reduces risk. So we take a look at, in this particular instance, we were asked to take a look at the existing building that had vacated space from the city of Worcester leaving, and was there the possibility of adaptively using some of that space for a jail? So as, again, Captain Richards mentioned, the jail administrator mentioned, there are minimum square footages and lots of regulations you have to follow when you start to look at this. So we started to examine adaptively reusing the space that was there and trying to open this up and making it more efficient and allowing us to try to come up to how are we going to come up with about 250 beds. Essentially, we looked at many different options, both internal and external to that building. And the bottom line is this: the square footages that were available in that existing building fall far short of doing anything that's going to meet the future bed demand. There just wasn't enough space in that existing building, no matter how it could be reconfigured, to get to these projected and forecasted bed needs. So we started to examine what are some of the other options, and can we maybe continue to use that existing building as a jail and then supplement beds to it. So we started to explore construction. First of all, we started to look at deconstructing areas within that existing building to open up the square footage and allow for some minimum level inmates and some support services like kitchen, laundry, administration, some medical intake, mental health, storage, loading dock. Can we still continue to use some of that building for some of those purposes, and then move the more serious offenders, the maximum level, to maybe some newly constructed cells in a building that's adjacent to the existing building? One of the important considerations is, how are you going to get those inmates then from that new building in the parking lot to court? We know that they're going to have to be transported to common pleas, but can we get, how are we getting the rest of the inmates to the municipal court? So that bridgeway that currently connects municipal court over to the jail, that was looked at as a key design piece that was going to be the connective artery, if you will, to any new facility. So that in many ways kind of drives, to a certain degree, the placement of that new facility out in that parking lot. We started to examine the cost of operating basically two jails in separate buildings. Our analysis on, once we started to develop this concept, was that the operational cost for staff was going to be cost prohibitive. It was going to result in, they basically, right now the jail is understaffed, okay? They have roughly 32 staff, correctional officers, that manage the inmate population that they have. In doing staffing analysis then on this concept of putting just maximum cells out in a parking lot in a new construction, and then adaptively reusing what amounted to as 4 or 5 floors in the existing jail. Now every one of those floors has to have staff people on it. And as we started to do the calculation on what that meant staff-wise, we were way over 70 staff people being needed to manage both facilities. When you start looking at operational costs, when you build a jail, here's what we know. We know that the capital investment of a jail is roughly, it used to be about 10% of the overall cost of the entire jail over the life of that building.
30 years.
So, well, originally it was about 20, 25 years. Now, because of the advancement in materials and design, and jails are getting better, now you can say that they're about 30 years, your life expectancy on a jail, before you have to put major improvements back into it. It's about at least 30 years. So the upfront capital cost is actually decreased to about 15% or thereabouts of the total cost. The rest of the cost of that jail is on your operational costs over the life of that jail. And of the operational costs, about 80% of it is staffing. So if you can control staffing costs, you can control your operational costs, and your long-term costs for that jail come way down. So we felt that a staffing pattern requiring over 70 staff to run 2 jails, it kicked it out from serious consideration because the long-term costs become much greater, much higher over the lifetime of that jail. So our concept evolved a bit, and we started looking at, okay, if we're going to put a holding facility out in the jail to house basically adult inmates, what are we going to do with the existing building? is it possible to adaptively reuse that? So the architects, Jim and Greg, started putting their heads together on that, as well as working with our planning team. And they started to identify other areas of justice services in the county that were suffering from shortage of space or compressed space, mostly over at the Common Pleas Court, and mostly connected to juvenile court, juvenile probation, probate court, administrative support, and some of those other functions that are going on over there, that if they could get those people into an adaptively designed and used space, it would relieve some of the compression problems over at Common Pleas, and it would give them more space. So we started to kind of test fit some possible usage for that existing building. But of course, that building is designed as a jail. That doesn't make good courtroom space or other office space, because they're, again, jail cells that are very small. The good thing about this design that Jim and Greg have determined is the shell is basically good, it's solid, and there's a lot of flexibility and ability to adapt the inside of that building, because it doesn't impact the structural integrity of the building. So they could gut the inside of this building, which has lots of failing mechanicals, as had been mentioned. These mechanicals, heating, air conditioning, light, plumbing, all of those things are in need of replacement in the existing building. And they are very, very difficult to access right now because of the type of design in that interior. So the discussion started focusing on, okay, if we're going to have to put a jail out in the parking lot, we know that we need to make some use of, because that building's not that bad looking. It's good structurally on the outside. And Greg and Jim will talk a little bit about some planned use and some possible expenses for that. But it became a key part of this study on how are we going to adaptively reuse that existing space. The new construction concept is, and I want this to be really clear, we are not in a design of this jail. We are in a project that was to come back with some concept and some ideas. So these ideas and these recommendations that we're offering up today need to have a lot more comprehensive work before you move towards design documents. Design documents, and after the bidding process, that's really going to establish what some of these costs are. But we feel very comfortable with the amount of information that we have, and at this stage in the game, if you will, that the information and the recommendations that we're providing are all reasonable, they're defensible, and they make a lot of sense for this county based upon our many years of experience working on jail projects. So our concept is ideas that are based upon lots and lots of work that a lot of people in this county have put forth in the last 6, 7, 8 months, and a lot of our experience and our knowledge on how these jails will evolve and develop from a concept to design.
Take a break.
Certainly.
That you can get ready to gin up the plan. As Tom has mentioned, and I think this is on, can you hear me? Very good. We're not proposing that anything like Shawshank be built in your parking lot. We want to emphasize that what we've considered, and to give you a little background on how we got here, when we were initially commissioned, the idea was to look at the jail to see how it could be expanded, and as Tom said, it's really the sort of the limitations of the jail that have caused us to go in this direction. There are more limitations than there are opportunities. The opportunities are to gut and repurpose. Does anybody remember the amount of beds that are licensed for this jail? Jamie said it earlier, 80 beds. We have a demonstrated need for about 240 beds, 250 on a peak. The idea that we could do something to renovate that jail and somehow get to the bed space, and anybody remember the licensed, it was designed for how many women? 6. There's 25 is the average population now. So there's been an explosion in the population, both male and female. The opioid problem is something that is likely to have mandatory sentencing attached to it real soon. We know there's some concern about being in the downtown. Go ahead, Tom. You want to give that to me? Just to give you an idea, jails don't have to look like jails. They're looking more and more like office buildings frequently. This is a sampling of some of our work in different locations. It's in Escambia County. It's Orange County's intake and release, isn't it?
Yes.
Intake and release.
Correct.
Does not have to be an impressive jail look to what's being done. What you have here on your current site is really a contextual illustration of what happened in the mid-70s. It was brutalist architecture. They put big blocks of brick down, but the truth is, as you look at that building, if you didn't know it was the jail, you'd wonder what it was. It might be an office building, your current jail. And the addition, I think, was at least complementary in form and proportion to what was built there in the mid-70s as a jail. It's the Los Angeles County Jail. And again, this is a jail. Give you an idea of the pod. This is something that was designed 20-some years ago in Northeast Ohio. This is the standard direct supervision pod with a perimeter of cells in a day room with stainless steel equipment, so that it's a pretty indestructible space. Interestingly, on a budget consideration, they used vinyl composite tile there, and the prisoners quickly figured out that if they could flood it, those would peel up. So those have been replaced. But this is a direct supervision where the officer is in the space, and that's a management decision that may or may not be made by your sheriff's department as to how they wish to supervise space. That's where the officer is supposed to, and it really does work, understand what's going on in the lives of these guys that are incarcerated. If somebody's wife is running around or husband is running around with somebody on the outside and they get wind of it, they're likely to be a behavior problem. If there's two guys, as Jamie kindly said, don't get along with each other, that's the kind way of saying they might kill each other. I think that's what you meant. And that's when it becomes a serious problem to the county. What this is really about is risk management. That's what this whole project is about. Right now, with your overcrowding situation, the risks that your officers are under and the inmates is significant and possibly a real problem to the county. This is a different, more modern pod, similar in principle in that it's got a big day room, it's a little softer, and I think there's some carpeting in there, but one of the key factors is all of the surfaces, unlike this one, if I could go back, where the vision into these cells is through a glass panel in the door, the vision into these cells in all spaces is almost all glass. This is all about visibility. This has a lot to do with some of the changes in legislation, not the least of which is the what's called PREA, the Prison Rape Elimination Act. I think that's the right nomenclature for that. But you have to have eyes on people all the time, and this is the current thinking in interior pod design. Is a lot of glass and a lot of vision. These are the kind of doors that are being used in modern jail construction, very different from what you have now. Some of your doorways you can't even get through. You couldn't get a stretcher through. And the hardware has gotten to the point where you can't find replacement parts for it. But this is an example of more current jail doors and hardware. So I'm going to give Tom a minute to cue up the design concepts. And again, as I think he already explained, what we were asked to do is really figure out what kind of capacity was necessary and what kind of square footage would be required to address it. And we took it a little step further and did some test fits with the number of beds and tried to give an idea for what amounts to being able to illustrate that this is a tool that the Sheriff's Department and the judges can use to safely manage the population in the county. This is an idea of the site. I think everybody knows this site. This is the oldest part of the jail. This is the municipal court addition and the parking lot. Go ahead, Tom. Oh, wait, do I have that? No, you have it. So, to give you an idea of scale, this is a footprint of about 18,000 square feet in the parking lot. The question about, well, what do you do with the parking has come up. Without giving you a specific number, we'll tell you that the city's abandoned portion of the jail has taken a lot of parking away from that. This assumes some of those spaces. We've also done some analysis and found that we've never been able to find a time when both this lot and the municipal court lot were filled. So we believe that between that and the surface parking spots in the immediate area, that there is no significant need for additional parking. But that gives you an idea of the footprint that would be necessary to house what amounts to a 3-level, actual 5-story complex, which is roughly the same height as the existing jail. Go ahead, Tom. Again, just kind of showing, I'm going to illustrate that this is a male area, female area, a large intake and release center. This has the support for the intake and release, a lobby and a sally port. There's emergency exits, and this is the bridge connection that gets over and ties into the existing bridge. And this is, again, not a completed design, but an illustration that the concept for this scale and capacity accommodates the projected numbers. Go ahead, Tom. So we're going to ask Tom to zoom in on one of these. Let's go to, probably want to go to the ground level, I would think. It's probably on the bottom. There we go. So, again, a bridge connector to the existing municipal court, sally port for drop-off. They come into the intake area where intake and release. This is where the prisoners are classified. The most important guy in the jail, no disrespect, Sheriff, it's not you. It's the classification officer, the guy that decides where to put the people that are coming through the jail. You can make a huge mistake by underestimating the sort of severity or acuity of an incoming prisoner and put him in a situation that's going to make the situation worse than it already is. So the classification officer decides if somebody has to go into segregated housing or he can be among a more general population. If somebody's just drunk and disorderly and just needs to sober up and get sentenced to, I don't know, a couple days in jail, he might be in a dormitory situation. The guy that is violent and continues to be, needs to be held in segregation. He'd go into an individual cell. So that kind of assessment takes place in that area there where there are holding cells for times when people need to be assessed. Go up to the next plan, Tom. Oh, I think you need to go back a couple.
Nope, I'm at 5. I'm at
Go back to 3, I think it is. Oh, wait, there we go, that's what I meant. So, to give you an idea of what a classification officer might do, I'm going to look at this floor plan. This is a second floor plan. This area that's all green without any dividing lines in here, that might be a dormitory space that could hold as many as 64 prisoners. In this case, the idea that the classification officer can decide, here are 4 smaller areas that might hold 16 prisoners depending upon their classification. If we go to, let's go to another, go to just above that plan. In the same configuration, this is a day room where these are segregation beds, where it's single or double occupancy, where it gives that classification officer the opportunity to say, you're a problem, you're going in cell number 1 where you're going to be alone, or you might have perhaps a second bunk. Very different kind of space, but what these are showing is the options to classify prisoners. This is the concept. This has supervision areas that again look directly into these spaces, so there are eyes on everybody all the time. These supervision areas have direct visual control of all space in the jail, with the glass fronts on the doors, with the exception of the privacy of the toilet area. You can see what everybody's doing 24/7, and that is critical to the safe operation of the jail. These areas here are recreation areas. This is based on zero movement, so that if somebody needs to get to a recreation area, they can get to directly off the pod. Nobody has to leave the floor. No prisoners have to be escorted. You're not tying up sheriff's personnel to move people. That's also fundamental to this concept. Just to illustrate that, again, conceptually, that's not a floor plan. This is the same kind of concept in a different shape, with the idea that if the sheriff's department decides they want to go to reduce staffing, you could go to indirect visual observation from a central core here, where the control room might be in the center, and you'd have a ring around. You wouldn't be directly attached to the space, but you'd have the ability to visual control the entire floor. Same concept, different options for the classification officer to place people where they need to be. Similar to the other concept, just a different use of the common space and the recreation areas, same kind of concept, just in a different footprint. This is about, I think we mentioned, it's about 18,000 square foot in its footprint.
Total of, let's see.
Yeah, this one is a 92,000 square foot total. The first option was a little bit smaller. So, to look at the existing building, because as it's been pointed out, the building looks great from the outside, it's structurally sound, it doesn't make sense for anybody to abandon or tear down that building, but to repurpose it makes a lot of sense to our planning team at least. Let's see what floor, we're in the basement. This is a floor that we're not necessarily recommending much renovation. There's about, I want to say 68,000 square feet in this existing building. We're suggesting that you'd want to renovate about 75 or 80% of it to repurpose it. The lowest level, which is emergency operations center and a lot of sheriff support space, locker rooms, personnel, or rather property storage areas and mechanical equipment and locker rooms. That's this area. This is the emergency operations center. Not recommending much change there. It functions pretty well. If we go up to the first floor, what we're suggesting is that the sally port, which is currently used to bring prisoners into what is now the classification area right in here, that these areas be repurposed as laundry and kitchen to support the existing, or the new construction. We'd rather not spend that money in space, in new space, if we can use existing space. And this would be the sheriff's support for the sheriff's department to service the jail. On the second floor, with the idea that the probate and juvenile court and all the support for juvenile court and juvenile probation, all the administrative space could come over, we've identified an area which opens up pretty easily to do a courtroom with judges' chambers and jury room. And the rest of the space would be for juvenile court, juvenile probation, and the administration. There's a good circulation, you can see the circulation areas. There's elevators here and here. And the current juvenile court space, I believe, is about 12,500 square feet. This footprint on this floor is just a little under 15,000 square feet. So it's a pretty good trade-off and gives them a little bit of room for expansion if it's very efficient. But there are some columns and things to work around, so we're expecting that to be a pretty good match for the space required by juvenile and probate court. On the, I guess this is the third floor, there's a large open recreation area now, but these areas we've identified as some space that could be used to address the needs for training and conferencing for both the sheriff's department and other agencies within the county. There really is a shortage of space like this. And the truth is, this is working tonight. It wouldn't for another 20 people. It's a little warm. So the third floor would be repurposed in that manner. Fourth floor, Tom? Fourth floor we have as a 911 operations center, and this is the upper level of the current indoor recreation area. There's some office space along here. And I think that about does it. Fifth floor is mechanical, which would remain. So there's good logic behind repurposing this building. It may seem like a lot of space gets eaten up pretty quickly. Anything behind that?
We just got the shells now.
To give you an idea, these columns, this is on the first floor where there's a little more structure, gives you an idea what that space looks like if it's opened up. Those little dots are structural columns. You want to take it up through? Sure. Opens up a little bit more as you go up. Go ahead, Tom. You can see here on the third floor, which is identified as perhaps conferencing space, you have the most flexibility to redesign that space. That's very open. And then mechanical above. That's it. Okay, we're going to see when we get back to the other portion. Let's see. Oops. So, Tom, I'm going to give this back to you for the operational costs and the staffing levels.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the costs of the square footages in our recommendations, but again, I had mentioned earlier about the really significant cost factor when looking at jails is not how much are you spending up front, but what are you going to spend over the next 20 or 30 years. So in this particular scenario with the new design concept in that parking lot, again, looking at approximately 256 total beds kind of as our base starting point, which is going to flex a little bit lower or a little bit higher, depending on a number of things. One is how many of those two-person cells that we have conceived in this early concept, how many will actually become one-person cells because of the need for individual cells. We're estimating at least 16 for men and at least 8 for female. Now that, again, is going to handle that population, not counting the mental health or the medical, but those behavior issues, the more serious, the assaultive ones, the more dangerous inmates. We're estimating that you're going to, from that 256 bed base, you're going to be taking away 24 of those, excuse me, for single cell use. So that drops your bed count to around 232 out of this, in this concept. Now, we also think you can add beds back into it by doing a couple things. One is creating a lot of those dormitory spaces for the population that it fits, so you, without question, have a minimum population of males that could do well in a 64-bed dormitory style setting. You also have a small population of females that would also do well in a dormitory. Those kinds of a design option for minimum beds do not require the same types of overall square footage to accommodate the bed. So you can actually get more beds back that you lost by going down to the single bed count, okay? In any scenario that we have in these concepts, it has complete flexibility and it will allow for those bed design numbers to be known during what we call the creation of these construction documents and the design documents, okay? Because that's when the staff from the sheriff's office and the jail will be working with us to look at how they want to function and monitor and manage the jail operation in terms of housing assignments. In all of these scenarios, I can see that you're going to need between a range now of 45.5 and 56.5 correctional officers and sergeants. Okay, right now you have about 32. So it is an increase of at least 13 and a half positions, that's people, or perhaps up to 56.5. Now what's going to determine that? You saw on concept, I think, number 2, when Greg talked about the ability to maybe move that one central control into one area. There's basically staff required for 2 different functions in a jail. One is to manage control. So that's doing all the monitoring of the closed circuit TV and doing door control, access, perimeter control, all of those things from a control area. That person never leaves that control area. Then there's what we call rover or movement officers. Those officers move around and they actually get into the jail cells. They do your 15-minute checks, your 30-minute checks, your rounds, if you will, whatever is dictated and determined by policy, because obviously if you have somebody on suicide watch, that officer's in there looking at them a lot more frequently than they are in the minimum supervision bed. Again, it goes back to the importance of classifications. But what we don't know is how we're going to handle the mental health and the medical population yet. We have schemed a few ideas about having what we would call an outpatient clinic, if you will, which may go into the existing building, could conceivably go in there. or we have to accommodate medical services in the new facility. So that 180 by 100 foot footprint may flex according to where those medical and mental health services are going to be located, and then where they're going to be housed. So if you are going to create a mental health unit, you're going to probably be adding one permanent staff post. Each permanent staff post is the equivalent of 5.5 people. A 24/7 post equals 5.5 people to manage that in a 24/7 operation. So that's why we have this range. It could slightly go down depending on design, and it could possibly go up. My initial impression is you're going to wind up with about 51 staff, which is going to raise from where you're at 32, but it's not the 70s that we talked about when we were going to be running two different jails. So the operational costs are driven by these staffing costs. We have a range of costs that we have calculated. We didn't refine that yet, but we know that on the low end it's going to be somewhere around $2.7 million for staffing. Could go as high as about $3.8 million if it's at the 56.5 and you have higher, longer senior staff and things like that. Currently, the budget for the jail is about $3.2 million. Is that right? 3.2 million. So we're not talking about a huge impact on the current budget if we're at the low end. Of course, they have lots of other operational needs come into this. The nice thing about a new facility is your operational costs for maintenance are way down for a few years. So you don't have to be fixing and maintaining and replacing clothing, mattresses, equipment, furniture, fixture equipment, because it's new going into a new building. So at the early opening of a facility, your operational costs and your maintenance costs are much less. Here's some of the recommendations.
I'll give this a shot. And late in our schematic design iterations, Tom mentioned that there could be an increase in the footprint. I should have emphasized when we were on some of those schematics that there is a mezzanine level above the control booths that is currently unoccupied, and we would do the medical and mental inside the footprint above the control areas in the mezzanine space above that. So it probably would not increase the footprint of the building, would increase some of the finished square footage. So I am the messenger and I expect to get shot, but we're recommending that a target of about 240 beds, which will change with the classification and the use of whether those are single or double bunks. It could go a little higher, could go a little lower. 240 beds is the target for all the inmate types. This equates to about a 90,000 square foot facility. Using a modest construction cost, about the mid-range of what's being built. There's the cost ranges for new construction in jails is running anywhere from $300 to $450 a square foot. We took the midpoint, and that generates about $33,750,000 for new construction of the jail piece. We're recommending a budgeting process for about $9 million to renovate the existing building. That's about 53,000 square feet of renovation. Some of that is in court space, which takes that number up a little bit. That could be managed a little differently. Depends on levels of finishes that are required by the county and how much is spent on technology and the conferencing and training space. We think that's a very rational ceiling to use for budgeting for the project. And I think that's, again, I wish there was a better way. Nobody likes to build jails. These are expensive propositions, but in this case, it's all about risk management. I cannot impress upon you enough what a miracle it is that you're in the situation you are now without more problems. You have what it amounts to is a really horrible jail right now. It's nobody's fault. It's natural. You're in the same situation that most counties are that have jails built in this same time period. Not that it's a twin, but there's a county up north in the exact same situation with the exact same jail design within a few feet, a few little modest design tweaks, but for all intents and purposes, you have a twin brother in Ashtabula. They're experiencing the exact same problems in terms of not being able to meet codes, not having sight lines, not being able to conform to all of the current regulations that are necessary for the safe operation of a jail. So,
Some questions.
I do have one question. Is there any others, or would you rather?
Let me just take a minute or two before we go to questions. And by the way, if you have written down questions, can you pass them off this, pick them up from me so we process those? I just wanted to explain something. And by the way, patience, you've been here an hour and a half. Thank you for that. We are in today hearing basically for the first time the product of what happened in this first phase. It's a recommendation from our specialty team that's worked with our team, but we're now going to spend, I'm going to say, June getting a deeper understanding of this, and including the public having a chance to understand what's being recommended. And then probably July, we're going to figure out what we're going to do with these recommendations that we now understand, and what basically we're going to turn into a proposal at the county level of what we believe needs to happen. And there's going to be, so there's a couple more months of work here that need to go on before we even can say, all right, now we think we're ready to go into a proposal phase. We have a proposal from our team that we hired, but we don't know where we're going yet until we process this. So that's, and the big part of that is, you see these numbers, how are you going to pay for that? And so that's a huge part of the project that will start to fall out as we get a little deeper into understanding this, and what are the implications of it, and how does that fit with the county's current operation. But something of this scale is not something you can just say, well, we'll just trim the budget here and there and just pay for it. We aren't going to have the revenue for this size project, even though I believe our fiscal conservatism will be applied full scale to see what we can do with our resources that we have now. But that will come later on. I think probably by July we'll be having that major, how we're going to pay for this. But we're probably looking at some kind of a proposal to the voters on a sales tax increase that would fund this, what we're talking about here. That seems like the logical probability. We don't know what that looks like yet, and what it would entail. But that's what I'm guessing. And we might have some discussion about that, which is what we're ready to do. Did you say you had a question?
I have one, and I think some more are coming up.
Okay.
I have one in hand, and I'm sure we're getting some more here, so we'll address them in the order that I'm handed them. First question is, have other locations been considered outside of downtown Worcester, Have any cost analyses been done comparing other locations? I'll backtrack for just a bit. When we were first commissioned, we were only asked to look at the existing jail and what might be done to that, which drove us to the solution that it might require construction adjacent to the jail. Late in the discussions, the idea of what might an out-of-town location mean to the analysis, and it hasn't been discounted. It hasn't been done, we have not done a deep dive into that. We will tell you that for largely security reasons, it made the most sense to our team to place the jail where we're recommending it. Doesn't mean that we can't give you a cost analysis on a new freestanding facility somewhere outside the city of Worcester. However, without a site specific, we can't really do that analysis. It involves running the utilities typically, which can be expensive, especially if you're talking about a large piece of property that's outside the service area. That doesn't mean that it can't be an option. I will tell you that for the transfer of prisoners, it would be a nightmare. You'd have two courts the jail adjacent to neither. You'd have a building which would be, in this case, we're repurposing much of it to support the construction of the adjacent jail, which gives value to the existing building. If we did construct a new jail outside of the city of Worcester, not sure how we would repurpose, amounts to 67,000 square feet of space, and it would defeat the adjacencies that are currently benefit the municipal court. I don't like the idea that that bridge would go to an empty building. We just didn't think it made a lot of sense, and pragmatically, it made more sense to be in the adjacent space. It's mostly for the transfer of prisoners and the security of the inmates and the staff that the building is placed in that parking lot. Security is foremost in our thinking, and this is all about risk management. I want to say hindsight in criminal justice throughout the country is you're at greatest risk during prisoner transfer. I can tell you that in the county that I'm from, the last 2 police officers that have been killed have been during prisoner transfer. People find out, you think you got secrets in your jail, somebody fakes a medical problem there at the Worcester Hospital. Next thing you know, their buddy knows when they're being transferred, one car pulls up in front of it, stops, another car pulls up behind it, stops, officer gets shot, guy gets away. John Glenn, 1988, Youngstown, Ohio. It's exactly what happened. So prisoner transfer means a lot to us. I'm sure it means a lot to the sheriff's department. Doesn't mean you can't build a freestanding jail someplace else, but if you do, you'd probably end up building all your courts with it, which would again drive that price tag up, just for that prisoner transfer issue. That's what's most commonly done when you build a remote jail. So,
Got one question over here. I got it for
you got
Jamie.
Okay.
The question I have is, are there regulations or guidelines regarding staff to inmate ratios? There are not guidelines pertaining to that. Only thing is the state standards regarding staffing is that it has to be reviewed annually by myself or designate. So, but there is no guidelines reference to the ratios.
Some of the things, however, that are going to determine what those staffing ratios are is as the design documents get developed, they consistently go to the state for review from the kind of the local jail inspector, if you will, and he will analyze how many jail beds are going to be located in each area, and they will approve the staffing patterns that we would be proposing. Now, some states do have minimum mandatory type regulations. Ohio does not have those. In other states yet, and in local jurisdictions, sometimes if there is a local labor union that represents the correctional officers, they will, as part of their contract, also establish what those ratios are. But in this particular instance, in our concepts, we actually moved to a ratio of about 1 staff per 7 inmates, give or take, which is better than what your current staffing ratio is. Again, remember that you're currently understaffed. You have a bunch of positions that are unoccupied that should be staffed, but the current ratio is about 1 staff for 4.7 inmates, and that's at the average daily population, not the licensed beds. So there are many different factors that contribute to your staff and inmate ratio here. And we are really confident that the new design will bring a higher level of efficiency between the staff to inmate ratio.
Good evening. If you haven't met me before, my name is Patrick Heron. I'm the county administrator, and around here I'm just called the numbers guy. So I want to talk a little bit about the question that was asked before about a jail offsite, a couple points that weren't raised. One was clearly raised, the safety issue. So what dollar value do you want me to put on the safety of an officer, for the public, or the inmate when we constantly have to move them back and forth in and out of the city? 2, and this comes into play in a different area, at least half the prisoners are going to municipal court. Right now you never see them. They never leave the secure environment. All those prisoners would be out of that secure environment going back and forth. More importantly, or importantly depending on who you are, is right now the sheriff handles all that transporting back and forth to municipal court. If that jail is off-site, then the area that the district that charged them, the city, the village, whoever charged them is responsible to transport them back and forth. So then you'll have all the villages having to send officers from Doylestown, from Worcester, from Orville, over to the new jail, pick up the prisoners, take them to meeting court, wait there, take them back to the court, and then go back to their district. How many villages, cities want to hire additional police staff just to move prisoners that right now are being moved at no charge to them and in a more secure and safe environment? How do you put a dollar value on that part of it? We can put staffing numbers, but the inconvenience to all the other entities by doing that is pretty much priceless. Another question was, how much did this study cost us? The study cost us about $40,000. If we go ahead and build the jail, then that comes off the price of the building of the jail, the architectural cost of the building of the jail. We had a couple questions concerning the pay to stay. Why not just bring back the pay to stay building? It's a great question. But in order to answer that question, we need to go back to why did the pay to stay come about in the first place? I've been here long enough to have that answer, and I look at the sheriff's office, most of those have been here long enough too to answer that question. At the point the pay to stay was built, we had a waiting list of people to go to jail of over 500 people. I don't believe we have that waiting list today. More importantly, if you were on the waiting list for, I think it was 5 years, then you were gone. You didn't have to go to jail anymore. And we had people that were on the waiting list long enough that they never served a sentence. So we put the pay to stay in place to give them, because these people were out on the street anyway. Most of them would qualify to be at work during the day. They had a job. At night, come in and report, or go to work at night, depending on where they worked, and report. And we had enough volume that we could work down that waiting list through the pay to stay program. And you also had jobs for them to go to. The people we're serving now are not the same type of population. We don't have the waiting list. We have suppressed usage. They're not going to prison. They're not sentencing them there. But they're not the same type of offender. Okay, they're not as many of the DUIs or those type of things. It's more of a drug related or a crime related to drug usage. The concept of a pay to stay per se is not going to alleviate the problem that we have today. That doesn't mean that we can't work on looking at the jail or the old jail, and maybe we have some kind of a reporting system. We might be able to do something like that, and that's going to be part of the further evaluations that we do. But the concept of the old pay to stay, one, near the end of the program, it didn't pay. Okay, we were just housing people and paying. We weren't getting revenue from it. The people didn't have work, and there weren't enough volume of people that qualified for the program anymore. When it opened, it was full. When it closed, it wasn't even half full. So it was a great concept, and it worked for a while, but it's not really the fit for today's people, for today's inmates. And there was a question about why not keep and fix up the existing jail for the people that have to go to court and then have another jail somewhere else. Well, we already talked about the concept of having a jail, using the old jail and building a new one, and the staffing of 71. That's without the increased transportation. You'd be up to a staff of 90 people probably to have a jail in one place and a jail in another and try to keep it going back and forth. That's just not going to work. But I think there was another question that I thought somebody was going to have to, oh, you have it. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question here, which after I speak, I'll ask the other judges if they want to add to it. It says with 78% of inmates having addiction issues, 68% mental illness, 48% both. Shouldn't these people be getting treatment instead of incarceration? Why are so many people falling through the cracks, and what preventative measures are being taken to avoid this? In our court, which we deal with the felony offenders, the biggest number that we deal with are lower level 4th and 5th degree felonies. The real serious stuff, we have that. I have 8 child rape cases pending right now. These guys are looking at up to life in prison. So that takes up some jail space too, because most of them have not made bond. But the people we see on a day in and day out basis are lower level felonies. Most of those people we keep in the community on probation. They're not in jail unless they violate probation. We have a drug court which Judge Spittler operates. I have a reentry court which actually deals with people coming out of prison. A mental health court which I had for about 10 years. I have not continued that in the last year because of numbers. We have a probation department which has day reporting, intensive supervision. We have people in treatment at 180 and Anazao. And we have a probation department that's underpaid and understaffed, and they do amazing work. And at least 3 of the officers are paid through a state grant because we're able to keep people out of prison. So they give us money because we're doing that. So we are, with the resources we have, if you put aside the people that haven't made bond and they're usually on pretty serious offenses, or the people who, as Judge Van Sickle pointed out, keep failing to show up for court. I just had a person today, they had 4 different drug possession cases. Low level, start out with a recog bond, they don't show up. While they're out, they get a second case, give them another recog bond, because they're not out there shooting anybody, they're just shooting up themselves mainly. And by the time you get done, they have 4 or 5 drug possession cases. So at some point, you got to lock them up so they'll show up for court. But overall, we bend over backwards to keep people out of that jail. So with what we've got, I think we're doing the best we can. I don't know if Judge Spittler wanted to add anything to that.
No, you said it very well.
All right.
I mean, I'm tempted to say, well, what Judge Weiss said, because we do view incarceration as a last resort for people who are struggling with addiction. No one goes to jail simply because they're an addict. What we try to do is work with them, and sometimes we have to hold that threat of incarceration over their head to give them some motivation to comply with their treatment or their counseling or their therapy or whatever it may be. Our probation department has been instructed to, as early as they can get intervened into these people's lives when someone comes in for a theft charge, we're asking those questions to find out, why are you here for a theft charge? We want to know, is it a drug-related issue? So if it is, we're on top of it as soon as we can to get those resources around these people so that they can get their lives back on track. Because the thing is, when they're not using, the vast majority of these people are not committing crimes. And if we could make a dent in the recidivism, we would get a huge bang for our buck. And so we're trying to identify these people that come in on 3 or 4 or 5 cases as quickly as possible, get to the bottom of the solution or get to the bottom of the problem. And we're working with the state to divert people from jail, and we're doing with everything we can to make sure that we don't use jail beds or we don't use incarceration for people who are willing to get the treatment, who are willing to stay out of trouble, and are willing to do what they got to do to follow the law. But the bottom line and the sad reality is there does reach a point for the safety of the community that we have to lock people up. I'm thinking of one individual right now who was on a theft spree. Every time you would let him out, bang, he was stealing from somebody. These are the type of things that affect all of us. It's your car that's getting its windows smashed. It's your insurance rates that are going up because of the property damage. So these affect all of us, and sometimes we're out of options and we simply have to say, we're taking you out of commission. You're going to sit and the community will be better off. That's rare, but we do everything we can to divert and to solve the problem, and try to be a good steward of the resources that we have. Judge Rickett, do you want to say that?
Good evening. I'm Judge Rickett. I'm the newest municipal court judge. A couple things I just want to bring to your attention. I've been there for about 6 months now, and I worked in the prosecutor's office for about 12 years before that as a prosecutor. And I'll tell you, one of the hardest decisions to make as a judge is, for instance, when the sheriff deputies bring us the sheet. We get it every day, and it's the sheet of, we need more jail space, we need more bed space. And when you look at the sheet, as a judge, you're not looking at generally somebody that's criminally trespassed or disorderly conduct. You're looking at charges like domestic violence, where somebody threatened to kill their wife, maybe, or aggravated menacing, where somebody threatened to kill their neighbor, and they said, "Hey, we need you, judge, to let one of these people out." And you look at the sheet, and then you're deciding, all right, which one of these people do I let out? It really becomes a very unsafe crapshoot, because you think, if I let this person out and they go do something terrible, and you have to make hard decisions every day, but these are the kind of decisions where if you have some more jail space, you don't worry about those. What you do worry about is you make the wrong call on that, and then the next morning there's an arraignment because there's a murder. And somebody says, why in the world did you decide to let Joe Smith out of jail? And, well, we just don't have enough bed space. And that's not a good answer for community safety. It's not a good answer for any potential victims. So that's one aspect that makes it really hard. It's not as if the first decision that we're making is just go ahead and put him in jail. With regard to the question about that was asked of Judge Wiest about, 78% or 68% have mental health issues. Just because they have mental health issues, also, you have to keep in mind that doesn't mean that they're not necessarily in there for something violent as well. It could be they have mental health problems, but those mental health problems, it's not just you have mental health problems and drug addictions and you're this population, and then there's a violent population on this side. Some of those things go back and forth in terms of trying to decipher who do I let out, who do I keep in. So it really is, at the bottom line is, it's really a public safety aspect, and I say that with all sincerity, trying to make the right decision. We want to do justice. We want to keep the community safe. And the last point I'll make on this, and I think the judges would agree with this too, is we've seen as judges the deterrent effect that's lost when you don't have jail space. And what I mean is, when certain inmates, because we've talked about, Judge Wiest mentioned, somebody has 3 or 4 or 5 cases, we see these multiple case offenders, they say, well, I know I'm just going to get kicked loose on Monday anyway. And they know that. They know there's not space in the jail. As mentioned, the inmates will talk amongst themselves. What are you here for? When did you get out? They'll write the judges. They'll know that the level of offense for which they're going to be held on is so low that no matter if they commit up to these level of offenses, there's no way the jail's going to hold me because they have 80 beds or 120 beds, so there's not even enough space anyway. So even to have the availability of more space, I think would become somewhat of a deterrent effect, where some of the lower level of offenders are going to say, I might actually have to spend 30 days in jail instead of 5 days, and then I'm going to get kicked out because I'm going to have somebody that's going to do something worse in the community that's going to take that spot. So really, I've seen it that it is an important issue for public safety. It's an important issue, not just, again, for the public and for law enforcement, but for the inmates themselves, as you hear about the number of people that are essentially living on top of each other, and it creates a lot of issues for everybody. So.
Okay, we've kept you here for 2 hours now. We really appreciate you being here. We wanted to present all the facts. We think we have done that tonight. Obviously, now we have a lot of deliberating to do yet, but this is a very important decision facing our county. It's probably the largest project this county has seen, so we don't take it lightly. And any of us are available for questions. Anybody who sat on the Justice Center Committee, we had this committee meeting since October. We included everyone in that committee, including mental health, so that we had everyone at the table and we got all of the facts. We will be deliberating. We'll be speaking. We'll be doing the speaking tour. I'm speaking at Kiwanis. I think Judge Bittler's going to join me. Oh, he doesn't know about it. But we will be, we will be out in the public speaking and getting the message out. And like I said, we appreciate you being here tonight. If you have any questions at all, we have an open door in the Commissioner's office, and I'm sure any of the people who were here tonight speaking will be glad to speak with you. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you.